You're watching Medfield TV Community Shows.
Welcome everyone to the July 30th meeting of the Medfield Board of Selectmen. I'd remind everybody, first, this is an incredible crowd, so it's great to have a meeting that everybody shows up for like this. I'd like to remind you all this meeting will be recorded, so if you have anything to say during the meeting, please grab a microphone, identify yourself and your address so that it's not so we can hear you, but it's so the folks at the home can hear you. And before we start, I'd like to just take a minute to express appreciation for our service members who are serving in the Middle East and in other parts of the world. Thank you. Okay, well this is a good start. We have the first item on the agenda is the swearing in of the new deputy chief. So Chief Garrett, ask you to come up.
Hi, good evening.
Good evening.
This is a real pleasure for me tonight. As you know, Deputy Chief Wilhelmy retired after 40 years of service. I was worried that I was going to have a challenge replacing him, but there was an individual within the Medfield Police Department who absolutely stood out to me as a tried and true character who represented everything that Medfield police officer should represent. His commitment to community policing and, more importantly, compassionate policing just resonated with me. It resonates with the men and women that work for him and certainly with the community that he serves. Deputy Chief Lars Anderson was appointed to the Medfield Police Department in 2005. He has served with us continuously for 14 years. He was promoted to the rank of sergeant in 2015. It is my pleasure to promote him once again to deputy chief. He is here today with his wife Deb and his two children, Kayla, who's a student at Merrimack, and Krista, who's going to be entering her junior year in Medfield High, and I hear is quite a hockey player. So if you'd like to come up, deputy, we'll have the town clerk, Carol Mayer, swear you in, and I believe your wife will do your pinning tonight.
Microphone.
We got a microphone for Carol.
Repeat after me. I
Lars Anderson,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully and impartially,
that I will faithfully and impartially,
and to the best of my ability,
and to the best of my ability,
perform the duties of the office that I have been appointed to
perform the duties of the office that I've been appointed to
in accordance with the town bylaws,
in accordance with the town bylaws,
town charter,
town charter,
and the general laws of the Commonwealth, so help you God.
and the general laws of the Commonwealth, so help me God.
And Deb, and if your daughters would like to come up as well and join in this. I need him to definitely not stop. I did tease whether Deb would like to say a word or two. She bowed out gracefully, but I did want to offer the deputy an opportunity if you'd like to say anything, if that's all right with the board.
Well, anyone that knows me knows that this isn't my specialty. It's probably even less of a specialty for my wife, Deb. But I do want to take a couple minutes just to obviously thank Chief Brett for believing in me. Seems to be a common trend here in Medfield that people believe in me, maybe even when I don't believe in myself. But I'd also like to thank the board, Christine, for allowing Chief Garrett to fill this position. I know it means a lot to myself, retired Deputy Chief John Wilhelmy, and the men and women here. I don't want to take over the meeting, but I do want to thank my parents for teaching me the value of hard work, being role models for me, and just letting me know that through hard work, anything is possible. I'd also like to thank the men and women that I work with. It's not lost on me what we're here for, but without those guys, they make me look good, right? So I was fortunate enough over my 15 years here to have some really great mentors that kind of guided me one way or the other, whether it was a guy that was my FTO or a chief or a sergeant. They kind of took me under their wing because everything I know about policing I learned here. So that said, I don't want to take any more time, but I want to thank everybody that took time out of their day to come here, the board for allowing this to happen, and the chief for believing in me that I can get this done. So like I said 4 or 5 years ago, that I told Chief Meany I wouldn't let him down, and Chief, I'll tell you the same thing, that I'll do the job to the best of my ability, and I won't let you down.
Okay. I think his first official duty is to come on over here and shake our hands.
Looking good.
With that business taken care of, I do have 2 other matters to bring to the board. As you know, the last time I stood before you, I made a request to open up lateral transfers. I'm pleased to say we had several interested applicants who are interested in coming to the Medfield Police Department. We have begun the background process and anticipate completing that within the next week or 2. But we do have a candidate that we were able to complete his background and identified him as an individual that we believe would make a really solid fit with our core group of men and women and would serve the citizens of Medfield very well. His name is Brendan Pascoe. He is currently employed with Boston College. Prior to that employment, he worked as an officer in Cambridge for their police department for almost 8 years, where he served in various capacities, including as a field training officer. He left that department for some family reasons and moved down to Florida, but since returning back to Massachusetts, would like to resume his career in law enforcement. I respectfully ask that you sign off on the lateral transfer paperwork, offering him a position here if he successfully completes the physical and drug screening as required by town bylaw.
I have no questions.
No questions. So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. The second order of business for me, or third I should say, we have been approached by Tri-County Vocational School for a 17-year-old student there who is requesting an internship with the town. He has an interest in both law enforcement and plans to enter the military after he completes his degree. His story is somewhat remarkable. He has suffered quite a bit of tragedy in his life and presented himself as such a good student that one of the teachers at Tri-County Vocational took him into their home to ensure that he completed his education and stayed on the right path. He is offering to come in every other week for the school year for a period of 32 hours per week. I believe that between the police department and here at the town hall, we would be able to accommodate that, and I respectfully request your permission to have him come in.
Is there any cost associated with it?
There is no cost associated with it. The only thing we have to do is keep track of the hours so that he can submit them at the end of the year.
Part of like a co-op type program?
Yes, sir.
Oh, great. Other questions?
No questions, no.
So it's part of the official school program. I'm thinking 32 hours a week for a kid who's going to school. That sounds like a lot, but that's actually part of the integral, that's part of his program?
Yes, it is. It's
Okay.
a requirement for them through their senior year.
Okay, and you said it was the department and town hall. Is it all police, or is it more than?
We're going to split between the town administrator's office and the police
He's
department.
going to see town government and the police?
Correct.
Okay, sounds good to me. Yeah.
This is part of the initiative that we spoke of when I first started about trying to bring youth into town government so that they could exercise, some of their education and see how a town like this works.
That's great. Yep. Motion?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Should keep you up there. This doesn't usually go so much fun and so easily as
I've been here when it doesn't.
Okay. We were going to have Mike Quinlan come up first. You're free to stay as long as you want, but we were thinking that perhaps if you stayed where you were in the agenda, you were going to be here for like a while before you came up.
Thank you for seeing me early. So I believe we have two things to discuss. First and foremost is the OPM contract for the Dale Street School project. I believe you should have a copy. I don't know if it's been
They have that.
distributed. Yes. Pretty standard OPM contract. We did hire or award not the contract itself, it needs to be signed, but we awarded the scope of work to Left Field through a process of interviews and shortlisting, et cetera. Pretty standard MSBA contract, so the MSBA unfortunately doesn't allow a whole lot of deviation from that. It's really just, it comes down to fee negotiation, which we went through. So we would like to see that approved and signed. They've already been working diligently. So if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Otherwise, I would recommend that it be approved.
Can you tell us a little bit about Left Field?
Sure. Left Field, Owners Project Management, relatively small firm. I believe they're around 20 or so. They do a lot of MSBA work, which, for those who don't know, is a lot of elementary, high school projects throughout Massachusetts. I would normally say they're the second best OPM, just given that that's what we do as well. But so it's interesting just to be on the other side of the table. We interviewed, I would say, probably the top OPMs in Massachusetts when we did our RFP out for services. I will say that, as you know, both myself and Tim Bonfatti hold a pretty high standard for what an owner's project manager should be, so we were very impressed by Left Field. I think they've done a great job. Lynn Stapleton, who is the primary point person for Left Field, is very experienced. She's spent, I think, over 20 something years doing schools for the MSBA, both at a previous employer and now at Left Field. And she would be our primary point of contact.
I guess the only question that, I recently met somebody who was in-house in Needham as like an OPM.
Correct.
Can't remember his name now, but is that the sort of position that Medfield should think about having eventually?
To be frank, no, we don't do enough building to justify a
Okay.
full-time position like that.
Yep, that's what I'm wondering.
We do hit these projects. I mean, we're going through a bit of a cycle I would say the past 10 years, that will taper off once we get through some of these big building projects. But I don't think the town personally does enough building to justify bringing someone in-house.
Yep, okay, that was my only question.
Is there an explanation for their name?
There is. I don't know if I remember it.
Assume it's
Jim
baseball.
Rogers, who I have a lot of respect for, started the company, and it had to do with how he came about it, and he says it came out of left field, and that's sort of how he ended up with it. But I don't remember the full story, to be frank with you.
All right.
I'll follow up with an email, Gus.
I'm a left-handed batter, so
Yeah.
actually right field is the one that I like. But I just wondered. All right,
Yeah.
thanks.
That's not enough to hold it up, though, I don't think.
Well, it's going to have to carry by 2 votes at least, but I'm still thinking. Have a motion.
Yes, so moved.
I second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Next, so the next steps in the Dale Street project is selecting a design firm. Part of this process, again, this is very much governed by the MSBA's process that we have to follow. We're going to be advertising for a designer very shortly, and that will go into all necessary publications, et cetera. And so in order to select a designer, the process is a little different than selecting an OPM, where the MSBA holds most of the sway. They have a 13-member panel called the Designer Selection Panel that's made up of various members of the MSBA, as well as some appointed from Boston Society of Architects and the AGC, American General Contractors, Association of General Contractors, excuse me. And so that panel sits with 13, and then they invite 3 from the municipality. So the municipality gets 3 members. They are pretty much driven by the MSBA's guidelines. So one gets appointed by the school committee, one is the superintendent of schools, and the other one gets appointed by what's called the CEO. In this case, that would be the Board of Selectmen. Typically, what we see in these elementary school projects is the Board of Selectmen or either appoint, whether it be a town administrator or the chairman of the building committee, as someone who has experience in this field and can do that. So I'm here respectfully asking for you to appoint myself to represent the town in that process, along with, you don't need to vote on that part, but Jeff Marsden as the superintendent, and the school committee will appoint their member as well. Basically that process involves the 3 of us. If it goes that way, we go to the MSBA during the short list. Once all the design firms submit their qualifications, we review them with the designer selection panel, and then we make a vote. And the town has 3 of those votes. The MSBA has 13. So you can see it's definitely tightly controlled. That said, I do believe the MSBA tries hard to listen to the town's concerns and listen to the town's preferences and what their general feel is when the interviews do happen. So the first step is the designers all submit their qualifications, they're reviewed, they're shortlisted in one meeting, and the follow-up meeting is a series of interviews with the shortlist, which is usually 3 firms. And then a selection is made immediately thereafter.
It seems like they should only get 39.6% of the vote. The committee would probably be more accurate.
That would be
yeah.
our percentage, right?
I have no questions.
I have no question.
I have one on timing. Does the designer get chosen, the firm get chosen before we even know location?
Yes. So the designer is brought on specifically for that reason, ahead of that, because they're going to help the town explore all our options, whether it's location. We're going to do site selection first, and it's going to be evaluating whatever we as a town decide are viable opportunities, including whether it's town-owned land or acquisition land. All those things will be evaluated. And then on each property, sometimes there's further options within that process, as well as what's required by the MSBA, which is looking at a reno option and a reno add option at the existing school. So all those options are in play. Typically, I would say that during the feasibility phase, which we're going to be starting, the average would be somewhere between 18 to 20 options are evaluated.
So thank you. The reason I was asking is that if I put myself in the shoes of anyone undertaking a large project, where it seemed to me it would be a big difference between whether you're looking for a firm that can put up a brand new building and a brand new site versus a firm that's good at renovating an existing building. So that was actually what was behind the question.
So our goal is to get someone who can do both and has experience doing both. That's part of the whole process. I would say that the majority of firms that do MSBA work and that have a history of being awarded MSBA work are qualified to do both, and certainly can handle whether it's a reno add or a new building on a greenfield site.
And just one other point of question. And all of this work that you're describing here, that we're all still within that $1 million that we appropriated and approved a year ago at town meeting.
Correct. That appropriation was merely to bring on this team to start the feasibility phase of this project, and then
We haven't spent any of that money
we haven't
yet.
spent a dime on it yet. That said, the OPM has been doing some work, but we haven't spent. We will get an
haven't paid them
invoice
yet.
once the contract is approved. So that is coming, but
Right.
it's been very small dollars.
Okay.
I would move that we appoint Michael Quinlan to the MSBA Designer Selection Committee.
I second.
All those in favor?
Yep.
Aye.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Okay.
Thank you.
Let's see, I think we now get to one of the major items on the agenda to talk about the Rose Bay project. For the benefit of everybody here, we I think have clarified for this meeting that unless the Board of Selectmen chooses to vote on something, This is a discussion that probably at minimum will lead to observations, insights, and comments from the Board of Selectmen that will be provided to the Zoning Board of Appeals. The actual official decision over whether or not to declare safe harbor rests with the ZBA. And I think we all kind of went into this meeting thinking that that was a decision that was going to be made tonight, but we've clarified that. So that doesn't mean we'll be any less diligent. It just means that this is not an official, there's not necessarily an official vote that will take place, although it would certainly be within our rights as a Board of Selectmen to take a vote that would be an input to the Zoning Board of Appeals if we get to that point in the discussion. So just so we all know what this is, the scope of today's discussion is. So with that, I'll, I assume Brian, we haven't met yet, so, okay.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, thank you. I'm Brian.
He's got to get a microphone.
Need a microphone.
Mr. Chairman and members of the board, I'm Brian McMillan from Newgate Housing. I want to thank you for the opportunity to be here tonight and discuss our proposal for the Rose Bay at Medfield. I know that I'm aware that the chief concern with the proposal is the design. There's been a number of discussions regarding the design going back now, 9 months or so, maybe more. I guess last August when we submitted our project eligibility letter application. I will discuss that. Before I get to that, I think it's probably important to provide a little context and background, some information about Newgate, who we are, and how we became involved in this project. So some of you may be aware, before I started Newgate, I was the vice president of development for the Northeast for the Gatehouse Group. In that capacity, I was responsible for the development of the park at Medfield. So although I'm Newgate Housing now, I was Gatehouse before.
No, the microphone is just for the people at home. But the HVAC is loud.
All right.
And so, yeah.
Well, then I'll speak up for the benefit of the people here. So Gatehouse still exists as an owner-operator of properties. In fact, I'm planning to use them as my property manager, but they no longer develop new properties. So essentially, I took the development function from Gatehouse, and we transitioned that to my new company, and I continue to perform really the same functions that we performed. My development team is the same, my architect's the same, my site engineer is Dan Merricken. Some of you may be familiar with him. He does quite a bit of work in Medfield. Our traffic engineer is the same. So we're familiar, the development team is familiar to the people and town officials here in Medfield. So although we're a new firm, we're an experienced firm. We really take the same approach to development in that we do try to work with the communities to help them achieve their affordable housing goals. Multifamily housing continues to be our sole focus. We don't develop, own, operate, or manage any other kind of real estate. Really this is our narrow area of expertise, and even within that area, affordable housing is really what we do. We're not what's called a merchant builder. That's more common in a conventional market rate product where they'll build it, stabilize it, and then flip it off to a REIT or an insurance company. We typically develop using the low-income housing tax credit program, which generally requires a longer-term hold. So we really build our properties for the long term. We use quality materials, durable construction. We make sure they're well managed. As I said, I'm going to have Gatehouse manage my property. They've been managing affordable housing properties like this for over 45 years and are very experienced. The town may know well from the operation over at the park. We really focus on making sure we have a creative design both in the site and the building, that we have an aesthetically pleasing architectural design, that the site is well landscaped, and really that it's a well-built, attractive place for many years during our long-term investment. In this case, Newgate may not be the long-term holder, as there is a plan to turn it over to the Housing Authority, which I'll get into in a little bit. I mentioned the management. The management of an affordable housing community is really important. That's why I continue to work with my friends at Gatehouse, who, although they are no longer developing, have really morphed into an owner-operator. So they continue to own their own portfolio of properties, including the park at Medfield, and operate those. They're going to continue with, they're going to expand into managing properties developed by me and other friends of theirs that have come through the gatehouse system. So a little background on how Newgate came to be involved in this. Some of you may know the idea, the concept for this development predates Newgate. It was the idea is set out in the town's housing production plan, and Newgate responded to an RFP that was put out by the Medfield Housing Authority to develop affordable housing for seniors on this property. Both the housing production plan and the RFP process contemplated a community of somewhere between 40 and 60 units. And when we get to the design, I'll talk a little bit about how we arrived at the number of units we have. And really, there are a number of factors that pushed us in the direction of 45. I won't call 45 units a magic number, but there's a real reason that we ended up at 45 units, and why varying from that too far can really impact the development. I should also talk a little bit about the relationship between Newgate and the Housing Authority. So I think it's important that we're clear that this is not technically an expansion of Tilden Village. It's important to make the distinction between Tilden Village, which is state-aided public housing for the elderly and disabled, and what we're going to put on, what we're planning to put on the new site, which is a privately owned tax credit development. That doesn't mean we're not working closely with the Housing Authority, that they didn't define some parameters for the development in the RFP, and that there isn't a mechanism to eventually turn this over to the Housing Authority. But it is important to remember that the Housing Authority's public housing, Tilden Village, and this proposal are really under two different regimes for financing. One is financed through the public housing, and this one is a tax credit development, privately owned, on land that will remain owned by the Housing Authority. Will be operating under a long-term ground lease. How it works is we set up a limited partnership, which is Rose Bay at Medfield Limited Partnership. That becomes the owner. A Newgate affiliate is the general partner of that entity. And then eventually, when certain conditions are satisfied, the Housing Authority will take over as the general partner of that limited partnership, which will remain separate from the Housing Authority, but the Housing Authority at that point will then control it. So we are working towards a common goal, but I think it is important to remember that it's not public housing. It's tax credit affordable housing. They have a little bit different affordability requirements, but we think what it does is it creates a nice broad range of different affordabilities, so that we can provide housing for a lot of different income levels for seniors in Medfield.
For seniors for the state, and I apologize. I lost my voice today, so I'm going to apologize ahead of time. Where Brian is stating this, it's the only way to develop affordable elderly housing in Medfield at this point, because the state does not have that financing. And that was the agreement from inception for elderly housing, and that is very clear.
Yeah, I'll talk about that a little bit more in a few minutes. I think we should also talk about who will live in this property. This is going to be age-restricted housing for residents who are 62 and over. That's consistent with the Housing Authority's goal that was required in their RFP. They wanted senior housing. And if you look at the housing production plan, and also I think the senior housing study, you can see that there's a projection that Medfield's population is going to age in the coming years. So we think it's important to provide affordable housing for seniors in this case. Typically, DHCD doesn't look that favorably upon senior housing for tax credit developments. DHCD is the tax credit allocating agency, where Medfield has been proactive and done such a great job developing family housing, including the park and some of the other things that have come along. DHCD will probably look more favorably upon this. So we think it'll be a good opportunity to actually provide some affordable housing here in Medfield. I think some of the other proposals that have come before the zoning board, maybe as lips, haven't been specified as senior housing. I think this is one of the few it may be the only one that's dedicated senior housing. In terms of the affordability, all of the units, the tax credit requirements, they'll be affordable under the tax credit requirements. They'll be affordable at 60% of median income. 9 of the units, so 20% of the 45 units will be affordable at a deeper level of income. So they'll be affordable to people at 30% of median income. Those are called ELI units. And I have the income. There's a matrix of the income limits depending on how many people are in the household, et cetera, and I can provide that to the board at the end, as well as the rents for the various units. The other thing to keep in mind as to who will live here is we're always in favor of doing a local preference. The local preference is restricted in some ways by the fair housing laws, but typically what DHCD and the laws will allow is that 70% of the units can be put in a local preference pool during the initial lease up. When we did this for the park, everyone that qualified for that local pool, it's a little broader than just people that live in Medfield. It also includes people that work in Medfield and that kind of thing, or work for Medfield. But everyone who was in that pool and wanted a unit got a unit. So we think it'll be a similar situation here.
Brian, can I ask you a question at this point?
Sure.
Does that local preference then disappear after the rent up?
Yeah, DHCD doesn't allow you to do it past the initial lease-up period. So, there's an outreach. We fill that pool with we make it known to everybody in town and locally that now is the time, and you have to have a lottery at the outset, and just as we did with the park. And so the way the lottery works is there are 2 pools. There's a local preference pool and then a general pool. You exhaust the local pool for those 70% of the units, and then you go into the general pool. And once that local pool is exhausted, hopefully everybody who lives in town and qualifies for that pool and wanted a unit got one. You move on to the general pool, and then after that, you can't have a local preference for the units. It's under fair housing, they won't allow it.
Brian, on the pool, it sounds like generally speaking, what happens is the local pool gets exhausted before the supply. The 70% gets exhausted?
It depends. You can have an oversubscribed local pool,
Okay.
in which case, those people would just go into the general
Go into
pool.
the general,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. Yeah, so Candace just reminded me that her wait list at the Housing Authority is very long and high, and there are a number of people on it. So she thinks that it'll be a good amount of people in the local pool that would want and qualify for these units. And we saw this with the park. Even in an affluent, comfortable community like Medfield, which is part of the reason it's so attractive for me and my investors to come here and invest $16-17 million in a new community. Even in a town like this, there is a need for affordable housing. There's really no community that escapes this need. We saw this at the park. We were pre-leased on every unit. We filled it. The only thing that limited us was how many people we could move in a day. I mean, it was people were ready to move in when when the buildings were turned over to us by the contractor. So we expect, and if you look at the statistics on housing cost burden, it's even worse for seniors, people over 60, 65 years old. So we think it'll lease up very quickly.
Brian, what was the local preference at the park? What percent was the local
It was the same,
preference?
70% at initial lease up.
And you filled it up with 70% Medfield people?
No, I don't. I can find that out. I don't know if we exhausted.
Okay.
What I know, I think we didn't in that pool, because I think what we did was everybody who wanted a unit from Medfield got a unit from Medfield.
Okay.
But I don't think it got all the way to the full 70% in that case. I'll find that out.
No, I think that's right. I think it was a higher percentage of Medfield residents than expected. I don't think there was an anticipation at the outset that it would exhaust the pool, and it was larger than they thought. I don't know. Maybe they can speak to what the current waiting list is at Tilden Village.
Yeah, I was curious to the current wait list.
Yeah.
Candace lost her voice.
I know, and I'm going to speak very softly because this is so annoying with my voice. we had a lot of residents. You have a lot of local need that I think goes unspoken that came to the housing authority during the time frame of the park that didn't qualify for our housing. So they got housed with the park on local preference as families who are in need here that a lot of people don't acknowledge. It did. And the housing authority itself was inundated with need at that time because we're also supplying those applications for the park. Clearly, there's a need for elderly housing here in Medfield. I came way before Brian did. I met with everybody in town during the time frame that we were looking to get into safe harbor prior to meeting or exceeding that because we knew the elders needed to stay in town and they can't afford to stay in town because it is so affluent and we're trying to keep them here with their families. Our list is tremendous and these units are going to provide that kind of housing for them. Not only that, but in our capacity with this collaboration, the state doesn't have any funding to develop new housing for elders. They just don't, and there's no question about that. I have gone to every single meeting I could possibly go to find any other avenue to do this, and this is the way that housing is looking. And in collaboration with these tax credit programs, we're moving into the new development of housing, keeping the elders in town, but also what I'm finding is there's a great need for the non-elderly disabled, true need for that to be like mainstreamed. And by allowing us to extend into this 45 unit development, we're going to allow ourselves to almost migrate some of those elders over, bring in some of our non-elderly disabled, and allow us to meet both requirements. But again, with the mainstay of keeping our elders in town. And that's the primary goal of this. It always has been since these conversations started. So suddenly, again, there's some sort of confusion or worry about, are we going to work with the aesthetics of it? We will do everything we can, but don't forget, even if we want to mirror Tilden, Tilden has no elevators. We're completely handicapped when it comes to elders. They cannot climb stairs. I have probably here in Medfield a very healthy waiting list. So my list is for Medfield residents easily, I want to say close to 100 between veterans, locals who are applying to get in, but so many are restricted because they can't climb the stairs, so they have to go for first floors. We have 60 units. These units that we're developing will make them aesthetically pleasing, but they have to have elevators. You need a certain leverage in order to put those elevators in, and we need to capitalize on the ability for someone in a wheelchair to be able to get to the second or third floor. They have to have that happen in order for us to do this. So, and it will work in with the neighborhood.
Yeah, you just reminded me a couple of things, and I'll touch on that in a little bit when I talk about the size of the building and the design and the number of units and that kind of thing. But Candace reminded me as well when Newgate came to this proposal, the idea of a technical expansion of Tilden Village, meaning the development of more public housing on this site, had already been exhausted. Candace had chased that down, and that's why they put out the RFP to look for an alternative development that would still achieve, if not technically the same goal of public housing, it would achieve the same general goal in that it's still senior housing and it's still affordable housing. So let's talk about the design, because that's what everybody really wants to talk about. A few things. So it's not lost on me. I think everybody's aware that the mass or the massing of the building is the chief concern. People are concerned that it's maybe too big of a building for that site, and we were fully aware of this. We engaged in a meetings with an ad hoc group, design group, to talk about the design, see how we could improve it. You'll see that we made pretty significant changes over the design we submitted with the project eligibility letter application. Our chief focus in that process was reducing, if not the mass, then also the appearance of mass. And I'll get into that a little bit. Before I do that, I want to talk about the number of units a little bit. There are a lot of different factors that moved us toward a 45-unit development. I mentioned already that MHP had said in their RFP they were looking for 40 to 60 units. The housing production plan mentioned this site as a potential site for 40 to 60 units. And maybe even not more importantly, but as importantly, to achieve a full allocation of tax credits under DHCD's qualified allocation plan, which is the document that governs how tax credits are distributed to a project, you need to have 45 units to fully utilize the cap that's allowed for each project. And there's a formula that goes into it, but it comes out to be 45 units. If you have fewer than 45 units, you're leaving tax credits on the table. You won't get it's $1 million a year of tax credits that you can then sell over 10 years. So it ends up being, $9 million something in money that comes to this project. If you have 20 units, you get half that, and you got to find that money somewhere else. So to leave tax credit equity on the table was a real problem, to be fewer than 45 units. Over 45 units, you're above the cap, and you're not earning tax credits for any more of those units. So you can build them, but it has to be, all those units basically have to support themselves with such a high rent that you can afford to build them. We looked at the site, and even though the parameters we started with were 40 to 60 units, we felt it didn't comfortably fit 60 units. And we decided that instead we would just try to achieve the maximum tax credit allocation with the 45 units, and we wouldn't go above that. So that's the other thing that I don't think we should forget about is, I started developing, it's 2004. The rule of thumb used to be, don't do anything less than 100 units because you can't operate efficiently. And because costs have continued to go up, resources have stayed the same, we're building smaller and smaller and smaller and making it work. If you get below 45 units, you really start to stress the operations, and you have to do things, Newgate and Gatehouse before Newgate never wanted to operate on a shoestring, so we don't. But what happens is you start having fewer people on site, full time, that kind of thing, to cut down on payroll to make it work. And if the housing authority is going to take over this property, I didn't want to leave them in a position where they have to operate on a shoestring. I wanted to have them able to operate their property without running at a deficit. So we really did need to make sure we had a sufficient size to operate efficiently.
But also, too, you have to dictate based on need. And our need is tremendous, and it's only 45 units. You're adding 45 units of elderly housing on top of the 60 we have. That's 105 units. That's it within the town of Medfield for our elders to stay within town and to live independently. And that's tremendous. And you have to keep that in mind, because they're not only going to have resources, they're going to have community rooms and exercise facilities, social services. There are so many things that will come to them that are a true benefit. And it's on top of that financial need that we have to keep that in mind, because really and truly the need exists for this housing.
It's good Candace is here to focus on the human aspect while I'm spitting out numbers and budgets, but it's important.
I'd like to know what it is from a development aspect, but also from being on the ground and listening to every single person that comes into me in the town of Medfield and says, please keep me within town. I've lived here my whole entire life. I hear this every single day. I can't afford to stay here. I sold my house. My kids are here and I don't want to leave. I've left for a while. I want to come back. They want to stay within town, and we have no ability to house them. 60 units. Put that in perspective for your own parents. 60 units to house them. And I'm your face of saying, I'm sorry, I can't help you. You have to go next door. So we want to make sure that we can keep them here.
There were also a couple questions asked before I get to the design that we came up with. People have asked about 2 stories as opposed to 3 stories, and also, sort of continuing the concept of the expansion of Tilden Village, a number of smaller individual buildings. I won't say we looked at the smaller individual buildings. We dismissed that sort of right at the beginning, and I'll explain why. We did look at 2 stories because we knew that would be something that people were interested in. We couldn't do it, and I think probably it's easiest to show graphically. Let me see if I think it's back here. If you look at this plan, A2, which is the third or second floor, they're essentially the same. Yeah, I only have a blow up of the second floor. But if you look, there are 15 units on the third floor, including two bedrooms, which are larger units. This wing alone has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe a half. You know, so if you were to take that wing and duplicate it over here, you'd get another maybe 10 units. You know, if you were really efficient in configuring it, took away some of the roof deck space, you know, therefore moving the mass closer to Pound Street. Could you maybe get that in there? I don't even think so, but maybe. But even if you did, you're wiping out all the parking. You're probably affecting your stormwater handling capacity, and you're killing the aesthetics of the. You're basically going to have one of those big U-shaped, deep buildings that you kind of see when you go in town, or you know, sometimes you see these in there. It's not a comfortable area inside. We couldn't park in there, and it also brings the mass of the building closer to our neighbors on the southwest boundary. So what we did instead, and I mentioned the smaller individual buildings. So those are really an outdated design they were probably outdated when they built them in 1970s. They're very inefficient. You have tons of exterior walls that are losing heat. You're not able to stack your plumbing and HVAC on top of each other, so you lose that efficiency. You're building a number of different roofs. You can't elevator them because there's too many. You'd need an elevator for every one of these individual buildings. That'd be too expensive. They force the seniors to go outside in the elements in the winter to get to the senior center, to get to the community center, to get to the office. At this new design, they'll be inside. They can go right down to the community center, the great room, the fitness center, the senior services center that we'll have in there. And so I think, you know, Candace already explained it. Those buildings are not great buildings for a senior community.
Can you get to the second floor? And certainly tons of slip and falls. It's awful. Yeah.
So now we can talk about the size, the massing. There are really two things you can do when it comes to size and mass. The easiest one is to make it smaller. Reduce the size, reduce the mass, lower the size of lower the roof, reduce the square footage. The other thing is, and it's hard to conceptualize, but there are ways to make a massive building appear less massive. It's really mass is a matter of perspective. You know, you can do the old trick, you put your thumbs up, right? And if you think about it, a 2-story building that's right on Pound Street, you know, whatever that would be, 20-something feet in the air, or a 3-story building that's 38 feet in the air but 90 feet away, has a much different feel than even a 2-story building up close. So we try to focus not so much on realizing that we couldn't do 2 stories. We really wanted to focus on what can we do to minimize the impact of this building to our neighbors along the southwest boundary and those neighbors along Pound Street and people passing by on Pound Street. So we used both techniques. We did shrink the building. We shrunk it quite a bit. Where's A4? Yeah, here. So this is a slightly older plan. This is the plan that we brought to the design review ad hoc group. There have been a couple of refinements and changes, but I wanted to bring this one because it shows the outline of our original proposal with the project eligibility letter. I personally kind of like the design. You know, these towers that were for the stairwells kind of mimicked the towers that you see here on this building, and I think your public services building, the new building, has those. So we sort of copied some of the design ideas around town, but what we heard was we want a smaller building. So we took them off. We reduced it, and we now have a building. It's 20% shorter than it was before. It's now. The total height of the building is under 40 feet. We're in a zone that allows 35 feet as of right. So we're looking for a waiver from the zoning board of under 5 feet for the height. The other thing to keep in mind is, so we're looking for a waiver of less than 5 feet. This site slopes down, both from the high school and from Pound Street. So the building will be in a depression of a couple feet. So the appearance of the size, again, will be less than what it actually is, right? It's going to be say it's 40 feet. It's not even 40 feet. It's 39 something, minus the 2 that it's down in this depression. So we're really working on trying to make this building appear. We're trying to make it as small as we can. We reduced the height to under 40 feet, but then we also want to make it appear as small as we can. So the other thing we did to help with the perspective is, in the red line again is the previous location. We moved this building back as far towards the high school and toward the Tilden Village property as we could, to move it away from Pound Street and away from our neighbors along the southwest boundary. You can see the building mass is focused that way, so this way and this way, and all that projects toward Pound Street and our neighbors along this boundary are the ends of the building. And when we get into the building design, I'll show you how we really try to dress those up to actually make them, you know, a really attractive aspect of the building facing our neighbors. Again, the importance of pushing the building back is to benefit from that perspective. Since the first floor here is only one story, since this end of the building is only 1 story high until you get 1 unit deep, you can see it a little better here. Just back up. You can see here. See there's only 1 story at the beginning, so it steps back before you get to the full height of the building, the 3-story height. So back to the site plan. Where'd that go? Yeah. So the front edge of this building is now over 60 feet away from Pound Street. As of right, it's a 30-foot front yard setback. So we've doubled what's allowed as of right. We've pushed it back a full 60 feet. Plus, it's about 30 feet of width for that unit. So before you get to the third story elevation, you're 90 feet away from Pound Street. Pound Street's 40 feet wide. You know, you're 130 feet before you get to the yards of the folks across the street. If I did the math right. The other thing we accomplished is we were able to reduce the gross building area by more than 2,000 square feet. So, you know, even in a great town like Medfield, there are single-family homes that are 2,000 square feet. So we essentially took a small, medium-sized single-family home out of this in our redesign. I talked about this. So I'm gonna talk a little bit in more detail about some of the other site plan improvements we made beside focusing on the appearance of mass and pushing the site back. Obviously that was the most important thing we addressed, but there were a lot of other things we did. We had a trash enclosure over here that was external. We realized it was not necessary and it was just wasting space. There's trash facilities on each floor of the building, so we didn't need that outside thing. By removing that, we're now not asking for waivers of any setbacks. We are fully compliant with all setbacks around all 4 sides of the property. And as I mentioned, we're doubling it on the front, and we're exceeding it by quite a bit on this side as well, while also maintaining the 25-foot landscape buffer along this side. If you're familiar with this site, there's existing vegetation here. We're going to try to keep that as much as possible. We did this at Park, if you're familiar with that. Along West Street, there was also a buffer of natural vegetation. We kept what was good. We cleaned out the undergrowth below, and we planted some new plantings to really enhance that. And we're going to try to do the same thing here along the southwest boundary. As a result of our meetings with the design group, we also agreed to add an 8-foot fence along here. So if you're for one of the neighbors along this side, you're now going to have an 8-foot fence backed by natural vegetation and a building that is, I believe our closest neighbor is 155 feet from the corner of the building. So it's hard to picture. It's one of those things that's hard to picture, but if you get close to your fence, you're not going to see anything because it's 8 feet tall. Even when you're stepped back, you're only going to see some part of the building above the fence, but it's going to be behind a screen of natural vegetation. So we really did try to we really were focused on these neighbors and our neighbors along Pound Street as we put this design together. One other change we made, the ad hoc design group, was extremely helpful to us. There are a couple of architects on there, people from the planning board, people from the Affordable Housing Trusts, really thoughtful design input. And one of the ideas that came out of that meeting was, if you're driving down Pound Street, other than this part of the site, there's a really well-defined street edge. There are some nice fences. There's, in front of the Housing Authority property, there's a small stone wall, maybe a foot high. And, you know, the thought was, let's continue that and create that defined street edge. So we've added this. I mean, this wall will be maybe a foot high with a fence on top of it. As I said, the site slopes down behind it, so it doesn't really need to be very tall. But we wanted to continue what was there and help continue that street edge that, you know, that will then connect with the property, you know, further down Pound Street that has a fence line as well. I think I mentioned the distances between the neighboring properties. You know, 155 feet is the closest one. That's well over whatever side yard setbacks are required. So again, we did that to help with the perspective as you're looking at the building from a neighboring property. The site plans, as a result of that group, we added some landscape detail. You can see it on the site plan. It's you know, it's just a little, just to give you the idea that we do intend to have some vegetated buffer along Pound Street that'll help, again, soften the appearance of the building as you're looking at it. One other thing that came out of the design meeting was, and some meetings with neighbors as well, was the concern about site lighting. That's always a concern. All the site lighting will be dark sky compliant. They'll be focused towards the center of the site, so they're not going off. We had a photometric plan done. It's in the plans that are in the application. If you look around the perimeter of the site, there's almost no light at all bleeding off. There's all zeros. There's a little bit of light bleeding off here, but it's very, very low. And then there's a little bit of light back here between us and the Housing Authority. There are no wall packs except for 4 wall packs on the back side here, which are, you know, wall packs are wall-mounted exterior lights. Everything else will be a post, a light on a post. And then the other change we made in the back here, which we think accommodates the senior resident profile, is we've added more than the required number of handicap accessible parking spots in the back. That came out of a comment that I think maybe it was the acting fire chief at the time when we did a site visit with DHCD said, you know, really it would be helpful if you had more accessible spaces. So we felt like it was easy to do. You know, if we would put them in there this way, and since we're over the required number of spaces, if we felt like we were running short on parking, we could restripe that for, you know, whatever the appropriate mix of parking was. But we wanted to start with excess of handicap accessible. So on the building, I noted earlier the dramatic height reduction that we achieved. We changed the pitch of the roof to accomplish that, and also took off those towers. And yeah, we really did. We got over 10 feet of height taken off of this building. So we were happy to be able to achieve that. Some of the other ideas that came out of the meeting. Yeah, you leave that because I'll need that. We added some windows at the end of there was a good focus on the ends of the buildings and trying to break up the plain facade that was facing our neighbors on Pound Street and facing our neighbors along the southwest border. The idea came up to, let's add, if you look carefully, you can see this is like a trellis with some greens on it. There's windows that we added here to provide some fenestration up here on this, and then we've really beefed up the horizontal trim boards. You can see those are much bigger than, wider, sturdier than what we had shown before, to sort of again help with that perception of mass. When you have the heavier trim boards, it helps to break that up a little bit. And then the other thing we wanted to do in the redesign is we wanted to make sure that we maintained the interest in the elevation. So we tried to keep as much of the architectural detail, balconies, changes in surface materials, changes in colors, surface articulation, changes in the step back in height as you go through it. And I think we not only retained what we had, but we added some really nice elements as a result of the comments we received from that ad hoc design group. So I guess, I think the other thing, I did, it's the last one here. Let me just grab this last one. So the other thing we were asked to do by the ad hoc design group, which I think was really helpful, was to provide a neighborhood context. And you can kind of see that the site, it's not a transitional neighborhood, but the site in some ways is a transitional site. You've got a large educational institutional use here. You've got a institutional residential use with the housing authority. This again will be a residential multifamily use, and then it sort of transitions into single family on Pound Street on the other side and out to South Street until you get way over to those condos that are over at Metacomet Park. So it in some ways it is not a bad use for a transitional site as you're scaling down from an institutional use, multifamily housing, single family housing. And I think we found this really helpful to provide some context as to how this will fit in the neighborhood. You can see where it's set back. It's much further than, you can't really even see it in here behind the tree, but the office for the Housing Authority property, it's further back than some of the other properties on Pound Street. So, Jim Murby, you mentioned that there might not be a vote. That's of course up to you guys. We would love it if you could vote to support our proposal to the zoning board. We do think there is a lot of benefit to the town of Medfield. As I pointed out, this was a goal that was set in the housing production plan. We're really fulfilling it with the stated affordable housing goal with a development that was contemplated by the town before we even were involved. It's 100% affordable. Every unit will be affordable. As a rental community, all the units will count towards your subsidized housing inventory. I mentioned it's consistent with the planning goals, but in doing so, it fulfills the need for a minimum of 42 units, which gives you 2 years of protection under the safe harbor. So coming into this, we viewed this as this would be the development that the town would want to use to take benefit of the safe harbor, not necessarily be the one that was blocked under the safe harbor. And as I said, we're providing senior housing, and that's on a site that was identified for senior housing, and
Well, I mean, based on on that point, I mean, based on what we have lined up, I mean, this development would put us over the 10%. So beyond just the 2 year safe harbor, this would take us over the 10%, and so we would be exempt from 40B from at least through 2030. And it's unlikely you'd have a significant development, enough to push it up that much higher by 2030. But so on our tracking chart, and if you want to have it, it's up on the website, and we have a copy for Gus and Pete as well. That lays out the calculation and how this fits into that. So, and Jim Brand put this together for us and updated this as of last week.
So that actually raises one last point. If you were to hit your 10% or use other safe harbors before you get to the 10%, it might be the last chance you have to do senior housing other than selected senior housing deals after you hit your 10%. This particular property is subject to a deed restriction. So right now it was deeded to the housing authority, or actually it was taken for first and then deeded to the housing authority for the purpose of state-aided public housing. So really any use, including this use, requires a release of that restriction by DHCD. Obviously, we think this is in keeping with the spirit of that deed restriction, so DHCD will release it. Other uses, I think, would be a lot harder to get that release, and certainly it wouldn't be in keeping with the housing authority's goals and missions, so they probably wouldn't, support that on their property.
And the town's request for us to do this, because we didn't actually solicit the town for this development. The town solicited us to come in and actually help them to be able to meet safe harbor. And we knew the need for the elderly housing development. So we're doing both of those things.
Brian, could you just clarify the point you just made about DHCD? So if the town did endorse this, there's still a few hoops at the state level that we would have, that probably will do it, but, so one of them would be that DHCD would accept this as senior housing that qualifies and is acceptable on the or waives the normal restrictions. Are there other?
Many. This is a long road. So I'm now hopefully going to get under construction on a very similar 44-unit senior housing development in Rockland. We had to go through 3 rounds of applications with DHCD to get funding. A little different there. Town hadn't supported family housing as well as Medfield has. You know, I think not quite the same circumstance. We're hoping it doesn't take 3 years, because it's 1 year per round now currently. We're hoping we don't have to do that here, but we're still going to have to do at least 2, we think. With each round, they have comments. They put it through an architectural design review. We have to address those. You know, it's a pretty well vetted design. It's based on a design we used even before Park. It's a little different because Park has the exterior breezeways. This obviously has center corridors, and it's a little different. But you know, the wall assemblies and the units layouts are really the same and have passed muster 10 times with DHCD. So.
Start with here. You want to open up to the floor?
Up to you.
Well, there's a lot of people here, and I'm guessing most of you are here for this project, so I'm going to suggest that we start by letting people from the audience ask questions. Again, remember, identify yourself and grab a microphone, but I think for my part, I would actually appreciate hearing what's on your mind before I even say a whole lot.
I'm Jim Sujan, and I live on 10 Sanders Way, which runs off of Pound Street. I guess some of my concerns would be, one, most of the traffic on Pound Street, people are driving between 40 and 45 miles an hour, and they come around the corner off of South Street out of control much of the time, and you're going to have older drivers trying to enter onto this street. It's going to be very dangerous. I mean, that's just an aside. The traffic is a major concern. I walk on Pound Street almost every day. The other thing is, another comment would be, I don't know how you're going to meet the parking needs with just 54 slots for 45 units when there's 2-bedroom units and there's higher income folks who are probably going to want to have 2 cars rather than 1 car per unit. There's going to be service people who need to get in there and park. So I'm concerned where are those people going to park? They can't park in the high school. They can't park at Tilden Village. Are they going to end up on my street, which will create safety issues? And I guess the final concern, it's a selfish concern, but it's not really. You're going to take away a cut-through for the students from the high school and the middle school, and so they're going to cut through my yard, okay? They're going to come right down Sanders Way and cut over to South Street. They are, you know, on half days, I get anywhere from 50 to 70 students cutting through my yard. With this, it's going to maybe be a daily occurrence of having large volumes of students coming down Sanders Way and cutting through everyone's yards over to South Street. I mean, that, you're shaking your head no, but yes, it's true. That's what's going to happen. And I just want to, that's a concern I have. Maybe there's a way to address it. I don't know. Maybe you've already addressed it. I don't know.
So you had three really good points, a couple that I missed in my presentation, so I'm glad you raised them. Traffic. We've had a traffic study done. There's a copy in the application that we filed. You're right about the existing condition. You know, the traffic study looks at the existing condition, then it looks at the as-built condition. It's a major cut-through street. You know, people coming from South Street over to 109 in the morning, they're all going east, and then at night they come back, right? Right. There are some traffic mitigation recommendations in the report that, you know, we can talk to the zoning board or the board of selectmen about whether, you know, and the police department, we should certainly think about whether those should be done. Yeah. The real question is, what are we going to be contributing to it? And as a senior development, there are not a lot of vehicle trips, especially during rush hour when people are rushing after work. There are a lot of people who are retired at that age. And so I think the traffic report said it would be 9 in the morning and 14 cars and during the whole hour of rush hour at night, you know, like 4 or 5 trips, what was that, on average. So it's been addressed in the traffic report. What happens in front of the zoning board is they'll hire a peer reviewer who will go through the traffic report, pick apart anything it thinks is not appropriate, challenge it or say, you know, he thinks it's good science or whatever traffic is, it's science. I don't know if it's science or not, but car counts and that kind of thing, and address the mitigation recommendations, whether there should be other mitigation put in place. But the bottom line is a senior development isn't going to add a lot to what's already an existing issue, which is too many cars and maybe going too fast. So Candace knows she has a hard time getting out.
So I understand what you're saying, but our population is like 1% of what you're already dealing with.
Sorry, Candace.
16 units, I maybe have, you don't want to hear this voice anymore, maybe 2 units out of 60 that are working, that are even going to contribute to that. Otherwise, they stay away from it. And one of the things I said to Brian earlier is when he was going over the layout, we went through these studies, and one of the biggest things was this cut through for the students. Now, number one, the land is Housing Authority land. So let's keep that clear. It's Housing Authority land. The Housing Authority's been courteous enough to let them walk through. It is not even anywhere as safe as it will be when it's developed. When we met with the school and we talked to them, we heard their concerns. And also, as a director who's been there for many, many years, I watched the students walk through. So we decided to incorporate the walkways that will still allow them to walk through. Much safer than it was before. But don't forget, you live where you live, and the kids have their own habits, and we can't change that. We can make it safer than what it is now. We also heard some concerns from the school about a playground. We're incorporating that on the back end of our property. Again, use of our property that is Housing Authority property that we're still allowing for use with the school. So we're taking that all into consideration, and truthfully, it benefits our elders at the same time. It really does. So I understand that, but just rest assured, it won't stop them from walking through your yard. It's just gonna make it safer, and it won't redirect more students from going to you. As far as traffic goes, I can tell you our use is minimal. Our residents stay away from that street as much as they can, as do I. When I come or when I go, as much as I do the center. God knows we need some redirection there too.
Yeah, so
Dennis, could I ask one question on the cars? I don't know even if this is going to be relevant, but to the point about the number of cars per unit. First off, because this is affordable housing, we're not talking about affluent seniors that have multiple cars, so that probably isn't a concern. But I'm curious, what's the average number of cars that people in Tilden Village have?
So it's 1 per unit, and it's based on, and again, what I'll say is it's 1 per 1-bedroom unit that houses 1 person. So in our 2-bedroom units, most times it's a medical need for those 2-bedroom units. They're very difficult for us to fill. So in incorporation to this design, we minimize those 2-bedroom units because honestly, it's usually a single individual. It's just the statistics. So it's 1 car per unit on average. We're the majority, 98%. And most times, I have to be quite honest also, is that when our elders get to a certain point, as will I, somebody might take my car away, and then I don't have a car for that unit. So out of 60, we probably have 56 that have cars for their units. So it's not going to be an overabundance, it's probably going to be lesser than what we're allocating for these units.
yeah, so when it comes to parking, we study to try to get to the right number. We look at, we do car counts from other when I say we, I have my property manager do car counts with their other properties that are similar populations. How many cars are there? How many cars are registered? How many trips do they have during peak hours? We count all that to come to the number of parking spaces we have. We also have our traffic engineer look up data from international traffic or whatever. There's some database that says how many cars are, and then we look at all those, and then we take a conservative number. We also obviously were heavily, we weighed the number of cars at the Housing Authority heavily. I do think it's not going to be quite exactly the same population. It'll be a little bit different, but when you're at less than a car a unit, that's a pretty heavy statistic. The other thing with parking is Candace has unused parking spaces at the housing authority, which we could lease from her in an emergency if we really need to overspill parking. We've built in, you can see 8 future parking spaces if we needed to do them. As I said, we could take out one of the extra handicap spaces and do a parking. So we've accommodated for if there is a need for extra parking. On the path, the path was strictly an accommodation to comments that we had received from the community. It's, we're concerned about extra liability and whatnot, but we wanted to do this as an accommodation to the school department and other people that said, hey, look, they're not going to stop going through there. The kids are not going to stop. They're going to do it. And so we thought, let's try to at least make a safe, well-kept path. I don't think we're actually going to clear it in the winter. We may have to gate it off in the winter because it's stone dust and whatnot. But the idea was, and this is at the request of the school department and some other people in town, like, can we just provide for this passage to continue? And we talked to the housing authority, and we thought it's an accommodation we do. If it's not wanted, we'll take it out.
Patty Allen, 59 South Street. My husband Chris and I live right at the head of Pound, pretty much the crossing. I have a question about the 1-bedroom units. Is it restricted to one person then, or is it just a 62 plus 1 bedroom? So there's a potential that there's 2 people, active people, that would have 2 cars. My parents are 74 and they both still have 2 cars, and they both drive all the time, and they're not wealthy. So.
No, there is always potential.
Okay, so this is possibly like 98 people living in this development with 54, 44 non-handicap parking spaces? Is that correct?
So let me just comment myself.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
As a director.
Yep.
Okay. So just as a housing authority director, and again, I'm trying to make you guys not to suffer with my voice. As a housing authority director, I currently direct 3 housing authorities. I've been in this industry for 20 years in total. I previously, as of last year, directed 4 housing authorities. Of my housing authorities, in all of their units, Foxborough that had over 200 units, Medfield to a 60, Ashland that has 40, Medfield that has 83 plus 21 federal units. The usage of these units is potentially and normally at 98% confirmation. It is 1 person in the 1-bedroom units by far. And that is from my experience in 20 years in housing. So I can't expect that by the time that these 45 units get developed, that all of a sudden the population of 62 and older, and God bless your parents, is all of a sudden going to need 2 people for every single bedroom in this facility. And that is just realistically speaking. And normally, if they have 1 car, they really and truly are still very active, and I only wish for that, because most times coming into those older years, those cars get removed. So really and truly, those statistics are real, and it's like 98%.
If I may just ask a follow-up on that, I mean, just in terms of what will be deeded with the unit, will the 1-bedroom units get 1 spot, and the 2-bedroom units will get 2 spots, or?
Based on people who are driving. So based on the people who are
The parking spaces won't be assigned.
Right.
You can only be a handicap space. You need a handicap, permit, but they're not assigned. I think you have assigned parking at the housing authority, right?
We currently have assigned parking, but in Ashland there's no assigned.
Yeah, we don't do assigned parking. But to answer your
But I mean,
question,
just on the hypothetical, and I understand the statistics, and I'm not arguing with them. I think it's, it's why all towns want to build senior housing, and DHC doesn't want towns to build senior housing. I mean, just theoretically, I mean, would the people have a right to park there as many cars as they have, or are they only going to have a right to park 1 car if they have 1-bedroom unit? Because usually, for example, even with the other 40B developments that we do, if there's a 1-bedroom apartment, you get 1 parking spot. If you're a 2-bedroom apartment, you get 2 parking spots, and otherwise, you don't have assigned parking beyond that. I mean, what's the rule? I mean,
it's a good
somebody has
question.
if a car collector moves in there and they have 3 cars,
No,
they
you
park them all
definitely
there,
can't do that. There is a limit. I'll ask Gatehouse what they do at Park, because I know they have. I don't think it's.
I mean, it hasn't been an issue at Park. I mean,
Yeah,
it hasn't been at all.
there's a parking. There's like house rules for parking that you have to follow. You probably need, I think they have like a dash sticker or something so that they know that it's your car. It's a residence car that's there. I don't think it'd be one per unit. You might be able to get an extra one, but only after, if there's extras or something like that. I'll find out from Gatehouse how they manage that. But it's not, you can't have an unlimited number of cars. It doesn't work.
And obviously that would help if there were a restriction on the number of
and that's something
that you're going to allow for the.
We're happy to discuss that. If somebody says, hey, we want to restrict this, that's something we can put into our parking plan.
It's one person per car registered and insured to that person who's in that unit, no more than 2 within the definition of space for the unit that they're in.
And how much excess parking do you have at Tilden Village?
7 extras right now.
What about that space that's over
There's
by the junior high?
Don't forget too, there's also multiple space that's open for aides and everybody else that
So again, we're open to, if the traffic consultant says, hey, you don't have enough parking, we'll happily talk about that.
My name is Barry Parker. As Jim Sajan, and I live at 4 Sanders Way, just off Pound Street. And just as an observation, I think you've done a very nice job as a team presenting your proposal this evening. It's been very interesting and very informative. However, I still am concerned about some of the items that Jim Sajanin brought up about the traffic patterns, about student access to the area, and so forth. But I have another issue that I want to address. The area that you've depicted here on the slides is a very, very flat area. There are no hills, there are no valleys in this area other than the little depression that you're talking about where this project is proposed for. We do have a water level issue in the town of Medfield, a high water table in the community in this very, very flat area. And I am concerned that the building of this project for 45 units in this particular area may make the water table issue worse. And I'm wondering, have you spent any time considering the fact that the water table issue in Medfield is a concern for a number of homeowners, and will this project impact that problem in any negative way?
So I'm not a site engineer, so I'm on thin ice here. There are stormwater regulations that have to be satisfied in the site. There's a full stormwater report that was submitted with the application as to how to handle stormwater. It deals with groundwater. The idea is, you can't contaminate the groundwater, that kind of thing. So I would rather have my site engineer answer that. Obviously that's part of what gets reviewed in front of the zoning board if we get there. It's a full stormwater analysis.
And Mark, just to clarify, I mean, that's one of the regulations you can't be exempted from under 40B. Is that right? In other words, if the ZBA concludes that you're not going to comply with the stormwater runoff, you don't get a waiver and variance from stormwater regulations and environmental regulations with 40B, correct?
That's a local bylaw, yes you do.
You do. No, I'm talking about the state. The local bylaw is the same as the state.
I
rule.
can't, I'm sorry.
No, I mean, you don't get an exemption from the state environmental regulations in a 40
That's correct.
under a comprehensive
but
permit.
Site-specific stuff is,
Sure.
it's mandated by the state, but it's a local bylaw. It's part
Right.
of our overall permit.
Right.
Yeah, it gets waived or can be waived.
Okay. Because we've never had that waived in any of our projects.
I think that there was.
We have to comply with the state.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what I'm talking
I mean,
about. The state.
as far as local, well, we didn't have the local stormwater in place when the park went in.
Right, but there's a state. I mean, there's a state that we had to do the whole rigmarole of the state and the federal.
Right.
100-year flood and all the other stuff that we did on that. I mean, we don't get an exemption from that. Right? You can't get an exemption from the state water.
Anything state that applies, obviously.
Right.
They're subject to.
And just as a matter of reference, and this is just speaking for the property itself, we have no issues with the water table. In the 60 units that we have, there's not any issue with that, nor in any point in time has there been any observed issues with the table cooling, or I guess I would say flooding in that area. There's none of that on that property. We've never once had to pump or I guess treat any of our basements or anything in those units ever. Millis, again, I can speak from multiple areas. Millis is a whole different factor. They have a huge water table issue also, and we do have to watch those basements, and we do have to pump them. Medfield has never been an issue. So that's only just speaking with the currently existing property, which is feet from where we're going back. And that's just my experience. So again, we can get further information from those site engineers just to satisfy that question, and we're more than happy to do any of that.
Paul Hinckley, Medfield. I've been a maintenance man at Tilden for 28 years going on now. That field next to us, no water in ours. They had a drainage ditch that ran behind, no water in that went from the school. The kids used to play in there, the high school kids. But in the 28 years, there has been no water on that property. The town cuts it, and before that I was cutting it, and the kids walk through there. No water on our property. And as far as the parking, when I got there were 24 parking spots for the same 60 apartments. And that's because women didn't drive back in those days. So they only had probably 20 people driving. And as we put in more spots, they still don't. If you have most couples want a 2-bedroom. If they do move in, they don't want to move it to a single place because they're not the bedroom's big enough for them. They can be there, but they don't want it. And unfortunately, we've got 6 units with 2 bedrooms, and I think 4 of them are only got 1 person. 1 person died, and we don't throw them out. And they still only had 1 car. Neither one of them, because when you get in your 80s, one of them isn't going to drive, or 70. And our biggest problem, and I'm there all the time, is we got people on the upstairs that want to come downstairs, but for them to come down, somebody has to leave. And they're not leaving unless they go to a place down the other end of town. So that's why we really need the elevators too, because then it doesn't matter. I know people in Medfield that had to move to Millis to get an elevator rather than go to Park Place with their wife, because when you're 65 years old, the wife doesn't want to carry the groceries upstairs, and neither does the old guy, because that's a big problem, especially after you worked all your life. You do need going up. But now we put in all those extra spots, and we still have 7 empty ones. And people are still giving them up. They don't leave there. They're not the problem on Pound Street. The problem on Pound Street is Main Street. Anybody would get on Pound Street not to go through the center of town. They come back, they cut through that way to go to Walpole, they come this way. You want a big problem? Go up to Harding Street. They're going that way to Dover, coming down about 100 miles an hour. I mean, and if you want to see a bad project, that one behind me that's on Hospital Road, they're 3 stories high, and you can really see them from the back. And there's no protection. I can see them all the way over to Harding Street. I think I'm looking at Boston. And they're built on a hill. And there's no hiding it. And they're right on top of each other. This place makes it look like you're in paradise. But Tilden is running good. We have strict rules. 1 car per person in a unit. You have to have 2. To have 2, you'd have to have a married person in one of those single units, and both of them would be allowed a car. But that doesn't happen, because most 80-year-old people, when they may die, they don't get married again. Even a lot of 65 don't remarry, so there's no cars. We got 7 empty in this day and age.
Got a couple other people over here.
Thanks. I'm Brian Nixon, 57 Pound Street. This is my first Selectmen's meeting in 28 years. And I knew this project was going on, and it's kind of right over there from my house, but I wasn't paying much attention. I got home on Sunday, and there was in my mailbox, one of my neighbors put in a picture, and I looked at that, and I went, that's a fat man in a tiny suit. Meaning, like, that just doesn't fit there. It's too big. And I said, how are they going to put that there? If they're going to put, like, if you try to take down Brothers and take down the Zulo Gallery and put that same unit there, people say, that doesn't fit there. And so it's just the pure size of it that was astonishing to me. So hearing you, Brian, tonight, and hearing you, Candace, like 45 units, that drives your maximum profit level. You've got 100 plus people waiting on a list. So I see how you're being driven to this and the motivation of doing it. I just look at it and say, like, I don't know how that fits in there. It doesn't fit in the neighborhood. It doesn't. I see what you're trying to accomplish, but it's kind of like, to me, saying there's a whole swarm of new students coming in, and we got to put 45 kids in Dale Street classrooms. We'd find another solution to it. So just an observation, understanding where you're coming from, but also just saying it doesn't fit. Tilden is Tilden Village, not Tilden City. And so that looks more like a city thing than a village thing. No, someone else is next.
Back to you, I promise. Actually, you know what, hold this. So I think that needs to be spoken to. So the board that you have at the Housing Authority is a board of all of your own elected residents. And many of the board members, or speaking in particular to one board member, has her own mother at the Housing Authority. And others who have been on my board are looking to get into the Housing Authority. We know the aesthetics. I know the aesthetics of Medfield. I know the population of Medfield. Brian knows the population of Medfield and the aesthetics. In keeping with that, we looked at it exactly from your eyes and from the eyes of the school, from the eyes of every single person that we could possibly hear from, talk to, interact with, and we tried to meet all of those demands. This really, I think, did a very good job of almost eliminating that feel that you were saying, this big fat man in a very small suit, and showing you that this is not what you guys were up against a whole long time ago with this great monstrosity trying to be built in Medfield, because they were trying to fit it into this small neighborhood and build this great big crazy building. We're meeting with all of the aesthetics of the town, but we're also incorporating a need that is tremendous. And I think I have to keep circling people back to the idea that we're all aging. And we all live, let's say, and not myself in particular, but let's say my board members. We all live in this community, and we all want to age into this community. And if we're not lucky enough to have enough money to be here and to be able to afford something more, then we want to be able to have something that's available to us. So we have to remember this. And we have to remember that this is all being based on that need for the elderly community. And then that need has grown. And it's changed from when we built Tilden years and years and years ago. People can't climb stairs in their age years. They can't. So how do we scale that down? Well, we made it minimal. And we made it aesthetically pleasing. And we made it accessible to the kids. And we made it aesthetically pleasing. And we looked at the lighting. We're doing all of these things. It's not huge. It's not overwhelming. And once it's there, we're all afraid of what we don't know. And once it's there, I think we're all going to be really pleased with the idea that we built something that's an incredible asset to the town. Because we fit, I guess, a need that really is huge and tremendous. And let me tell you, even in the incorporation of like walkways for the kids, for me, that's a problem. I love kids. I have kids of my own, but let me tell you, when I'm dealing with them and they're kicking stones out of my walls and they're yelling or screaming or swearing in front of my elders, I don't like it. I have to deal with it. I get complaints to my board members. I have to work with it. But I heard the demand of the town and they said, you know what, Brian, look, we've got to meet this need. This is what we have to do. We had a playground. It was built from the school on the back of the property. Wasn't even part of what we knew. They never asked. But we said, you know what, they're there. Let's work with them. How do we work with them? We don't want to push them out of where they are. It's not the property, but we're going to work with it. The neighbors. What do I want in my backyard? What do you want in your backyard? Do I want my mother to stay in town? Do I want to be able to walk over and see her? Yes, I do. And how do I make that need feasible and aesthetically pleasing? We're doing all of that. In truth, no matter what we do, we're going to hear as many of your concerns as we can. We can appease the majority, but we can never satisfy everyone.
I agree with everything you're saying. It's not it. He's conflicted because he needs 45 units. That's the problem. And so that's and so none of us is saying that everything that you're talking about, which is the need for housing for our elders, and we love our parents, we want them to be able to stay in the town. We agree with all that. So it's just it's the challenge of having his need, Brian's need, of 45 units in a space where I just don't think 45 units can fit. As much as aesthetically changes that you've done, so that's all I was saying. It wasn't about not needing, having a problem and trying to solve it. It was just my opinion. I have a fight for the mic. I have friends like you.
I just want to make one point about concerning how you said that we're meeting Brian's need. That we're meeting Brian's need because he needs 45 units. Brian doesn't need, all right, he does need 45 units. We need 45 units of housing for our elderly. If I could tell you how many people that I've talked to in a week that come in that are being pushed out of their current apartments because the owner's redoing it, they're making the rents higher, they can't afford it. They've lived in town for 30, 40 years, and they're in tears and they don't want to move. All their friends are here. People that have had to move, calling me daily to see, where am I on the list? Can we get in I'm in Walpole, but all my friends that I go to church with, they're in Medfield. They'd be so, I really want to be at Tilden, despite how small the apartments are and how much people have to leave behind when they downsize to move into that, which is difficult. They still want to move in there because it's the community they've grown up in, and it's the community they've raised their kids in. It's the community they love. 45 units is nothing. 45, that's apartments for not even half the people that need them. So I disagree that it's what Brian needs. I think it's what the town needs. And well, no, I know. I felt like what I heard you say was, and I apologize if I'm wrong. What I heard you say was that it's too many units because it's what he needed. But so I apologize if I was wrong.
Hi, my name is Deirdre Murphy. I live at 45 Pound Street. We live directly across from the proposed project in a single-story home. So there's been a lot of talk about traffic tonight and parking. What I've heard is anecdotal evidence and assumptions about parking and traffic. What I'd like to see are some facts and some statistics. I understand that the town will do a peer review of the traffic study, which hopefully will be more robust than the developer's traffic study, which was based on a single-day count of vehicles entering and exiting Tilden Village. That's it. As for the mass of the project, that is the real problem with the project, as Mr. Nixon points out. Now, you said you don't need any waivers for setback requirements. You do need, however, a lot of other waivers which are indicative of the problem with the mass and the bulk of this project. And those are, in the RU zoning district, the lot area for a proposed project like this should be 366,000 square feet. Your project is going to be around 100,000 square feet in comparison. The allowed building height in the district is 35 feet. You've said it's 40. On one of your plans, it says it's 42 feet from the slab. I don't know how high it is, but it's higher than it is allowed as of right. In the RU district, the maximum allowed lot coverage is 35%. Your project would be 58% lot coverage. So those are the statistics, despite the setback, that demonstrate that this project is too massive. Now understand that you believe that you've made a lot of adjustments. Nobody has ever consulted me or my partner, who live directly across the street. So your initial project was actually a shocking affront to the community. So the fact that you've made adjustments to that project in response to the outcry is frankly only natural. And what I think is that the hard work starts now to make this project acceptable in scale and density and mass to the surrounding neighborhood. Mr. Parker, when he started talking about how flat this area is, I didn't know where he was going, where I thought he was going, that it is so flat. So this project is going to just stick up like a sore thumb in the middle of our neighborhood. So I'd ask the Board of Selectmen to take into account the neighbors' concerns about the mass of the project.
Over here.
Don Cohen, 368 Main Street. I walk on Pound Street every day with my dog, right past this site. I had one question, which is where are the pertinent HVAC structures on the plan?
They're on the roof.
They're on the roof. So do they make the roof higher than the 40 feet?
No, they call it a swimming pool design. So if you look at, we have a great blow up here, but you can kind of see, so this roof actually has a depression in behind it, and all the HVAC is hidden on the roof.
So it's on. So it's facing the high school.
The roof goes all the way around the outside, and in the inside they call it a swimming pool. It's a depression.
I see.
That hides all of the mechanicals.
Okay. Thanks.
We purposely did that so they wouldn't be visible on road.
And I just want to echo the comments about traffic and the traffic consultant. Which traffic consultant did you use? Vanessa. Okay, I'm not familiar with them, but I've been involved in some other developments and neighborhood concerns about them, and we've been very unimpressed by a lot of these traffic consultants. Not only do they'll do things like measure on days when there's events going on that change the traffic. They'll miss the parking issues. They'll miss major things about the parking. I'd have major concerns about parking. This is a population that's going to be a lot different than Tilton Village, from what you say. Yeah. Well, it's going to be more affluent. I mean, 60% of the median.
Still affordable housing.
Yeah, I understand that, but 60% of the median is a lot. Is an income level that's considerably higher than I think what's in Tilton Village. So I think you're going to have people with more cars. You're going to have people come to visit. They're going to come to have home physical therapy and things like that. So I would be very concerned about the amount of parking. One way to make sure you don't have too much parking is have a smaller place, and that would also address all the area concerns as well. And I have the traffic mitigation would be great. This would be a great opportunity to make Pound Street much safer. It's really dangerous right now, especially when you cross at Robert Sproul. People can't see the people standing there at the crosswalk. I've almost gotten killed a couple of times. So anything that would slow the traffic down would be a great thing to add. And I have a question for the Board of Selectmen, which is, we've been working really, really hard to get into safe harbor. What would be the motivation for not using safe harbor here?
Well, I think, and I can speak briefly to it. I mean, the working assumption that we presented to town meeting and that was supported by town meeting and was supported by 80% of the voters on the bond was that we wanted to control our destiny as we got to 10%. The assumption was we're going to get to 10% one way or the other. And so the motivation to not exercise it here by the Zoning Board of Appeals would be to look at the alternatives. So I agree with the concerns about the aesthetics. Okay, I don't like the design. And if I lived on Pound Street, I would not want to look at this building. Okay, I don't know that I would consider it an affront or be offended by it, but I would not want to look at it. All right, I get it. I'd rather look at trees. And if I've been used to looking at trees for 28 years, I'd rather continue to look at trees. They're generally preferable to almost any kind of a building. So what are the alternatives? Okay, if you were to do this to get the same number of SHI units, do you know how many single-family houses we would have to build if we did it by single-family houses? Do you know?
Well, I don't know.
So it would be 180. Okay, so if we wanted to do this by single-family houses, we'd have to build 180 single-family houses. You know, Mr. Hinckley referenced the development on Hospital Road, which was our last unfriendly 40B project that went through in town and went through before we adopted the housing production plan. I'm probably less of a fan of that development than I would be of this particular building. So I think the motivation would be, from a public policy standpoint, what are the alternatives? And the reality is we have worked hard to get into safe harbor. We have said no to a number of projects while we've been in it. We've said no to a number of projects early on. So we've had a number of developers who have come to us with ideas that just didn't fly at all. And so we'd have to look at it, the zoning board will have to look at it, what are the alternatives? And one of the valid criticisms of the stuff that we've done to date is they have been concentrated in one particular area of town. So if you look at most of the units that have been built over the course of the past several years and that are lined up to be built, they are between Dale Street and West Street. And the reality is, if you look at the block of 27 and West Street, you know, there's going to be one on one corner, there's going to be the Legion project on the other corner, the park is down the street, the other end of that block is the development on Dale Street. And so, you know, that's a valid criticism. It is true that most of the projects have been in that particular area. I think apart from, again, granting the aesthetic concern, the other reason to do it would be to say, we've done a lot of work on senior housing and identifying the need. One other thing that has come out is, for seniors, proximity to downtown is important. There is no other place proximate to downtown to build any sort of significant senior housing development. So could conceivably you do a 30-unit, two-story development there, which you could. And it probably would not work under tax credit financing, right? So you'd have to say, okay, what is the cost of that aesthetic change? And because the only other source of funding for this that's remotely realistic is Medfield tax dollars. And so if we decided to say no to this, I assure you the Affordable Housing Trust is still going to be committed to developing low-income senior housing there. I know the Housing Authority is not going to turn around and say, turn this into, you know, luxury senior housing on that same location, because that's land that they control that they're not going to give up. And so if you want to do 30 units of low-income senior housing, you lose access to the tax credits. It's not going to be viable for someone like Brian to do. And so we'll say, okay, your construction cost $17 million, roughly?
Just keeps going up.
Ballpark. Ballpark, $17 million. Obviously, you knock a third of the units off. You're not knocking a third of the cost off. Maybe you're knocking 20% of the cost off. And so, okay, is Medfield then going to say, we're going to issue a bond for $12 to $14 million, almost the cost of the public safety building, because of an aesthetic objection? Maybe we should. Or maybe what we should say is, you know what, we're not going to do this. We're going to find someplace else to do it. We're going to do something more substantial at the state hospital. We're going to do something more substantial someplace else. So I think, and again, I'm not prejudging this. We don't have a vote on this. You know, I've been going back and forth on this over a period of time. But I think if you want to know why we would, I think it would be to look at all the alternatives that are around, the pluses and the minuses. One of the realities of aesthetic concerns with any kind of buildings is they do change as people change. You know, none of us is here forever. And we've had other instances in town where there was general town support for developments, where there were significant concerns from a small number of abutters, and they've all eventually moved. And so the people who had the objections move on, and then the people who would move into the house afterwards don't have an objection to it. And so if you're making that kind of a judgment, you've got to make a long-term judgment. You know, as much as we'd like to say, I like everything the way it is right now, because that's where I moved. But if you're looking at the long term, if you compare the overall impact of, you know, to get 45 more SHI units, to get to 10%, to serve this need, any development is going to have a bigger impact on services. And the reality is, the reason towns want to build senior housing, it is very low impact. It does not have an impact on schools. It does not have an impact on crime. The traffic impact is going to be less. Now, is it none? No. But you compare 45 units of senior housing to even 45 units of market rate regular apartments, going to be populated mostly by people working, where your 2-bedroom units aren't going to be couples or retired people. It's going to be two 25-year-olds who are going to work, and they're renting the 2 apartments. Or you compare it to the added traffic from 180 houses. 180 houses is way more than what, even in your wildest dreams of how many cars people are going to have at this development, if you build 180 more houses, they're going to have a heck of a lot more cars than those 45. And so if you want to know why we might consider not exercising it, every single one of with the exception of the 2 houses we've done on North Street, which were probably the only of these LIP projects we've done that has had unanimous approval, and it's not replicable at scale because there aren't that many to do. Every single one of the projects we have done, we've had objections to, right? And I think when I got up at town meeting and laid out the case for the Affordable Housing Trust and for the bond, which included a discussion of this project. Now, not this design. Now, to be clear, the design it was a surprise to me. It was a surprise to a lot of people. So not this design, but the idea of 40 to 60 units at Tilden Village, I mean, that was presented at town meeting. The Affordable Housing Trust passed almost unanimously. The bond passed almost unanimously. Nobody got up and said, whoa, you can't put 40 to 60 units next to Tilden Village. Nobody got up before there was a vote on the bond and said, wait, you can't do it. So, I mean, the number of units, I understand the design issue, but the number of units has been on the table for a long time. And so again, it's a question from a public policy standpoint. How do you weigh this potential project against what the alternatives are? And is the inappropriateness of this building sufficient to say, instead, we'll build 180 houses in a 40B part as piece of the hospital development, or 180 houses on some other chunk of land that will then use up, I mean, that's got to be at least 50 or 70 acres of property where it would go in different places around town. Or would you look for another substantial apartment type development that wouldn't be there, but would be non-senior housing, or certainly non-low income senior housing? Because the reality is, in the normal LIP projects that we do, 75% of them are market rate. So of those, when you talk about the lowest income seniors, the people who are the most challenged, who have the fewest options, I mean, you get a lot more bang for your buck in this type of development than you would in almost anything else. So it's a longer answer than you're looking for, but if I were answering your question, which I just did, that's, I think, why you might do it.
Could I give you a shorter answer that's different? And could I get you to put this picture? There's an aerial picture that you had.
This one?
It's not that one, because that one's there. I want the other one. That's the one, yeah. This discussion tonight, and I guess I'm sharing something, at least the way that I think about, as a selectman, what we're trying to figure out. If you think about, Candace, the comments you made, Lisa, the comments you made, there was an argument that says there's a need, the town needs to fill the need. I'm betting you all know that. I'm betting, I would be willing to bet a good number of you probably qualify if you wanted to, and even could potentially have a vested interest in the need. The issue isn't that. The issue is you all have houses that are somewhere close to this, and while you will be supportive of a need that, even if it puts a reasonable burden on you, I hope, this is something you're wrestling with on, is this a reasonable burden, or is this a burden, whether it's traffic or whether it's just simply the aesthetics of the neighborhood. I look at these two, and this is one of the things I've struggled with, because I think that's what's been on your mind, is this thing an albatross that's going to be looming over our yards? Forget whether it's doing a good thing or not. Is it an albatross? And when I look at that picture, I see something that looks like it's a bit imposing. When I look at that picture, I sit there and say, and I understand there's a perspective issue here, but I say if Tilden Village is 60 units, and you see what this on that picture, and the other one is 45 units, I find myself saying, well, maybe that's not as bad as I think it is, but I don't have the answer. I have two pictures that hit me two different ways, and it's of the same thing. Let me tell you, so I bring that up because I understand, I think, why you're here, and I don't think that we, on policy or theoretical grounds, should automatically just say, well, that's too bad the dice rolled and you happen to live in the wrong spot. But somehow or another, we have to figure these things out. I've got, like Paul, I have, after 23 years of a wonderful pastoral view across the pasture, I now have looming buildings that are looking at me, and it's like, you know what? It's a lot further away than it is for you, so I'm whining here. It's not what it used to be, but it was kind of what I thought the town needed to get the 40B. Here's the dilemma that I have on the policy side. Not that this is the only way to do this, but if in people's minds Tilden Village extended for another couple of acres to the right is the only thing that works, I think from a policy standpoint, we're saying we will never expand housing on that land that's adjacent to Tilden Village, because that's a model that is inefficient, that doesn't work, and in fact, for this target population, we're making a decision we're not going to get there with this land. There may be something in the middle, but in my head, that's what I'm saying is that piece of the discussion is we ain't doing anything, not for a long time. A year ago, I was involved with the senior housing survey, and I'm oversimplifying, but we basically said, listen, we should be planning for 400 units for seniors, and they could probably use them within the next 5 years. We won't get them there. Of that 400, about 25% of them qualified for some form of 40B. You know, I'm playing fast and loose with numbers, but about a quarter of seniors need or qualify for affordable housing. We're not doing anything for that quarter, except this might do for at least half of that quarter. It might do something. So I'm looking and saying, well, we're not doing anything for the seniors that might need something the most, and I don't know where we're going to do it. Mike, I might mention that 50% of those seniors want to be close to downtown. It's like, sure, where? I actually think there could be one other site, maybe 5 or 10 years from now, and that's if the Dale Street School moves somewhere else. I think there is another site, but that's five years out minimum. So, and then on top of that, we've got seniors that don't qualify for 40B that we're also trying to figure out how to build senior housing for. So the dilemma, the balance is to figure out how to not impose on those of you who live close enough to where this is going to be a burden, with the dilemma of the town needing to be able to move ahead. And this seems like it has, and this has got nothing to do with the 40B and the 10%, although that's important too. This has to do with us moving ahead with seniors and senior housing. This is the horns of the dilemma that I've been on for a couple days, and I'm now convinced I'm probably going to stay on for a while. I would only ask you to understand both sides of that and to consider it, and if there's things that can be done that you see that will not unduly burden you, that could help make this or something like this work. Brian, I've never met Brian until tonight. I only, by reputation of the experience we've had with Park, was predisposed to think that he was probably a pretty decent guy. What I've heard him talk about tonight in terms of the things that you brought up that he has already thought about makes me more confident that if we are going to do some kind of a development like this, this would be the kind of a developer we would want to be working with to do it. And that's based on one project that has been a success. And this project that may not be the exact right project, I don't know, but at least it's a project where I see a developer who's listening and trying to modify. He's got to fit it within an economic box, but he's, I think, trying hard to figure out how to do this in a way that is going to work. That's where my head's at. Sure. Where's that microphone again?
Hi, so I would just like to clarify, I'm not opposed to development on this site. And I haven't lived there for 20 years. I don't expect there to be green there for much longer, if at all. I don't oppose affordable, age-qualified housing. I recognize that this site is ideal for an age-qualified, affordable housing development. We walked down here tonight from our house across the street. So I recognize all that. It's really only about the scale and the mass of this project on this particular site. So I don't disagree that something should be built on this site. I recognize that Tilden Village is not desirable or economic for seniors if you build a new project. It's about the mass and the scale and the design that has to be addressed.
So the only quick response I have to this, and this is not from great knowledge, it's what I'm worried about. This gets more a little bit at what Mike was talking about. The issue is there an economically available alternative for doing something there that's less than this? In other words, if there's no state funding to do the subsidized housing like we did on Tilden Village with a modern, updated approach to doing it, and the tax credits at least put some, limits to how far anybody can economically build a project, both on the high end and the low end. What I worry about is that, and I am not trying to exactly argue for this particular design. I'm pointing out that I'm looking for an alternative that's actually a feasible, viable alternative that somebody's got money for, that we could do something there, and I'm worried there aren't too many alternatives that are not, I'm basing it based really on where the housing authority's gone, that at this point in time, there are not too many alternatives other than this kind of an approach, because the state money's not there for the old stuff. That's the other dilemma.
So I think what would go a long way, maybe, is if there was actually some math put behind that and some explanation, because a lot of assertions are made about, why it can't be 2 stories, why it has to be 3 stories, why it has to be 45, why can't it be 40, why can't it be 39? If that could actually be explained, because it can in a meeting like this. But if somebody could provide something like a write-up, so that the neighbors could have a chance to consider, there's a lot of arguments being made here about how the math works or doesn't work. And you can't really address it in a meeting like this, but if you could put something out in writing that could explain it, then people could consider it.
Could I ask a question of the neighbors? The basic concept of an apartment-like building like this, is that okay? At a smaller scale, so it's the size, not the concept of the housing. Okay.
It's not just the height. It's not just the height. It's the mass. It's the amount of space it takes up on a small site.
I think Gus hit the nail on the head when he was talking about the financing and how the town would afford to be able to accommodate the need that the seniors have. Hit the nail right on the head. Having been on the Housing Authority Board for many, many years, we've been working on trying to expand housing for such a long time, and we've gone through different developers, we've gone through different plans, and we've tried to go through DHCD. And we had to start to get creative. And how can we fill this need for housing and not burden the taxpayers, because we don't want to do that, and meet the needs of the town. And we came across, this compromise, and have been working on it for years and years. And
I think the original planning board approval for the Tilden expansion to that site was at 1974. There's an existing plan on file, the original expansion, and there just hasn't been funding for it since it was adopted in 1974.
It was actually originally approved for a mirror image of what exists on that property for a larger number of units than what we're proposing now. Just a different development, because again, they didn't anticipate the need for those elevators, and we have to accommodate that need.
And
We have to.
we tried to be creative again with the elevators and the access to the second floor apartments, because it's a huge problem now. You're essentially eliminating half the development to the seniors that need it. And we looked into different things like stair lifts. Maybe we could put stair lifts in and then make all the units accessible, but that can't happen. So elevators is something that is crucial for the seniors. And I'm sorry.
Oh,
You
no.
have the mic. The number of people, the seniors that have been injured, having to walk out of their units in the winter Huge. And I wouldn't want to put my parent in that situation. And I love how these units have amenities right. The trash is right on the same floor. Laundry. Very nice.
Bill Jakes from 5 Sanders Way.
In the interest, I'm going to suggest that we probably will close this off after you unless somebody's screaming to say something, only because I think we've probably gotten, and plus Pete hasn't had a chance to say anything yet, but I've got to suggest we close this off so we can move on with the agenda after this one, if that's all right, if nobody violently objects to that. Okay.
I don't know if it'll be a good ending. Bill Jakes from 5 Sanders Way. It's a beautiful design. It is. I think I'm close by. I'm agreeing with many people that have voiced the size and scale of it in this residential area, and maybe to understand more why this location is so critical. And I don't understand the tax advantages, and I know that I'm sure someone can explain that. And who's benefiting from that? Is the town benefiting from it? Is the developer benefiting from that tax advantage? But it's really more the location and why it needs to be that location. If it was a smaller development, I think you'd have more people buy into it. That's my guess. The senior center is quite a bit outside town. Why does it need to be in this town location? I don't see a lot of people walking from Tilden Village. I do a lot of walking. So if people are going to be traveling into town, they're driving. They can easily drive from an area outside of town. That's just my thought. It seems like it's being pushed on this particular location for some reasons, and it's understandable. But it just seems large. It just seems large for the neighborhood and the abutters. So that's my thought.
So one last comment on that.
Just want to get the microphone, Candace.
Really not necessary for right now. One last comment I have, and I know you're all familiar with Bubblegum Bob and George O'Brien and so many of my seniors. I don't know. And
Well, the people at home won't hear you if you don't have it.
they don't really need to hear me right now. Sorry, people at home. So if you notice, you will see, if you're closely paying attention, my seniors that I appreciate every single day, because this is my life. And I hope only for myself that I, in turn, might be, I guess, lucky enough to be in a space where I might have a walker someday and still be able to walk down to a place like Brothers Market for a frap and a sandwich, and to see the kids who are hanging out down there. Because every single time I go down for lunch and I go to grab my sandwich, there's Bubblegum Bob, and there's George, and they're all down there. And people who are wonderful in this town, and everybody in this town that I've come across so far, except for a select few, are really wonderful. And we
I
all
was going to say,
have
except for
them.
the selectmen, I was like, wow, that's got
A select few who are amazing enough to say, oh my God, you got down here on your walker, let me give you a ride back. This happens every day in my world. And the reason that this property is so viable for a project like this is because elderly, non-elderly disabled, they have access to all of those amenities that the center of town offers. And that's why it's so crucial for us to work together to come to an understanding of how we can accommodate this structure in this neighborhood and keep everyone as happy as we can. We've got to work together on it. I promise you, we'll work as hard as we can not to make it overwhelming. And again, I have to reflect back on the statement that the unknown is always scary, because you've been looking at this space forever the way it is and not the way it might be. And then once, as it's been pointed out, the structure is there and you're acclimated to it, you'll say, why was I so afraid? Because everything that you voiced, we've met to the best of our ability. So I just think you should consider that. And that's why it is really and truly so, I guess, unique, this property in and of itself. I get calls every day for it. And we just really and truly, since the inception of time, when I was approached to build and I was asked to do the footing that nobody else would do, it was because we need this elderly housing. And that's what I'm here trying to do to the best of my ability with limited resources. So I think that that's the best answer.
And can I just say that we have an opening on the Housing Authority Board if anybody wants to
Right.
Pete, you haven't had a chance to talk.
Well, yes, thank you, Gus. So I think that the selectmen for a long time have been pushing the Medfield Housing Authority to expand the housing for the seniors, the elderly, and at this site. I've always thought of it as the expansion of Tilden Village. I've been a selectman now about 19 years, and I think probably 17 of those we've been asking the Housing Authority to expand Tilden and to create more housing for seniors in town. Even before we got started dealing with 40Bs, we just thought it was a good idea. And I think it's been a very universal acceptance of the people that I've served on the Board of Selectmen with that this is a very logical place for housing for seniors. I think that the size and the mass of this particular development was a surprise to me that it had to be that sort of 3-story large building. If I had thought about it, I would have probably assumed it would be an apartment building. As I think about it more, now that I've seen the plans and have looked at Tilden, my solution for the whole site would actually be to raise the existing Tilden and replace it with something that is integrated with this type of building, maybe 2 stories high. I don't think that the existing Tilden Village is a very successful complex at this point. Electric heat, second stories that people don't want to use, that they can't get to. And the existed 60 units of Tilden seem to occupy 2/3 of the space, and so that we're kind of, but that's not where we're going at the moment. So what we have is what Candace and the Housing Authority has been able to craft after years of being asked to do something. So I'm very appreciative of Candace stepping forward to take the bit and to actually get something done, because nobody else was willing to do it before you. And so that I think that we actually have, as a town now, we have an option for more housing for our seniors, whether this is the plan. I mean, it's going to get vetted through the ZBA, certainly. And residents will have an input there. It sounds to me like we have a conundrum in terms of the finances of it versus the size and the mass, but that'll be a political decision, I guess, that the ZBA will make.
Could I ask the group another question? I asked about the apartments. You said apartment format works. Can you envision a 3-story apartment of any type that would work? And I'm not smart enough to know the validity of this, but if the economics of elevators call for 3 stories, then we're between a rock and a hard place if you can't envision a 3-story format of any type, and yet we want senior housing, if in fact that point that elevators, in order to be economic, have to be 3 stories. Can you picture that there's some possibility of a 3-story apartment complex that would, I don't know exactly how it would look. To Pete's point, if you start thinking about moving closer toward Tilden Village, and I'm making this up, taking up that first row and thinking more about something closer, is there some possibility of a 3-story building configured in a particular way that would work, right?
I think that's a leading question, I think.
Microphone. There's a microphone somewhere.
Gus, I feel like it's a little bit of a leading question. I'm wondering why you're asking it.
Well, because the main point is that if you need 3 stories for an elevator, and if you need an elevator for senior housing, and if single floor senior housing isn't feasible, what I'm getting at is we're in a box where if 3 stories is out, under any aesthetic circumstance, 3 stories is out, then the elevator is out, then the senior housing is out, is kind of where I'm coming from. And I'm trying to get a sense of the group.
Well, how would it look different from what we're looking at, from
Well,
size standpoint?
Again, now you got me way out of my league here, but when I look at the first floor, where the second floor is cut back 1 unit, then I'd say, well, what a third floor if it was cut back yet another unit? Or if the wing that currently is facing, going to the right, was a wing or a shorter wing to the right and another wing, a T instead, I'm making this all up.
Yeah.
But what I'm trying to do is move it closer to the current Tilden Village. So that's really, I'm trying to think of, if you had to be creative, what would creative look like? If it can't look like 3 stories under any circumstance, then I put myself in a box if the elevator issue is true. So that's why I asked the question.
I'd rather not answer the question if it would influence how the project might go. I'd rather just go its normal process.
Perfect example, the town hall had to have an elevator, and you're only on the 2nd floor. Think of the people that have to walk up to the 2nd floor around it. They're 50 and 60 years old, they wouldn't want to do it.
Right after I said we were cutting this off, I just lit the match again, but it's all right.
You asked.
I know.
I can't resist. I'm sorry.
I know.
So you asked a hypothetical. I really don't think we should engage in hypotheticals. It's not up to the neighbors to design a building that's acceptable in mass and scale and density. I think, we've expressed our concerns. This will go before the Zoning Board of Appeals, and that'll be a place where there can be a dialogue, a negotiation. Perhaps the developer would be willing to meet with the neighbors, and we can talk about it, but we can't engage in hypotheticals, and we're not design engineers.
Yeah, I wasn't looking to get you to commit. I was getting at the point that Brian's going to walk out of here with some feedback from you all that the mass is not acceptable. And what I'm really driving for is what are the parameters of mass he has to work with. If one of the parameters is, well, mass by definition as we look at it is nothing can be 3 stories, that's at least useful information for him. If the answer was, no, I think there's probably some way you could do a 3-story building, it's just not this, that's better, that's a different kind of information. What I'm really trying to do is to not, I don't know if any of you'd recognize this, but there's an old saying we work with in my profession about someone asking you to go in the woods looking for a rock. And you come back and you go in the woods, you get the rock, you bring the rock back, and they say, no, that's not the rock I want. I'd rather not have Brian walk out of here being told, go get another rock, and we'll let you know if it's the right rock, that's all.
Well, the problem is that Brian went through very quickly why this can't be 2 stories, why the financing doesn't work, and as I said earlier, that hasn't really been explained to us. So I don't think the onus is on us now to provide detailed guidance to Brian. I think it's Brian has the onus to explain to us exactly why it can't be 2 stories, why that wouldn't be uneconomic. Putting aside, I understand the need for the senior housing in the town, putting that aside.
Okay, well, so that's useful. You don't have to redesign anything yet. Getting basic information to back up the rationale behind this design would help. Microphone over there,
And the finances are all laid out in the ZBA process.
I would just add that the zoning regulations call for a 35-foot high building. That could be 3 stories.
Well, but mass probably has more to do with the height than the. Okay, I think if either of you, I'm not sure, do you all want to talk among the 3 of us and let everybody watch, or at this point, I think I don't have a whole lot more to say than what I've already said, and I'm not at a point to basically call a shot one way or the other. But I can be.
No, I think that's fine.
Okay.
I think that's fine. I mean, it sounds like the consensus is this can be worked out through the ZBA process. I mean, I think that, I've been clear with Brian that I think there ought to have been more of a public process to this point. And he knows that, and, this was not, this design was not presented to the Affordable Housing Trust, and so we've been used to kind of having that process where there is sort of an extensive public process in advance of the ZBA process. That hasn't happened. That's with the choice that Mr. McMillan made. I disagreed with it, and so I think there is a fair amount of work that has to be done on his part, and probably has to be done at that first hearing on August 15th. And so, because the ZBA is going to have to make its judgment within that 15-day period after August 15th with respect to the exercise of safe harbor. I'm always hesitant as a matter of prerogative. I was mistaken. I thought we had to make this call, and so we didn't. And I'm always hesitant to give kind of direct guidance on specific matters to boards that we appoint. Because, we appoint boards and we empower people on those boards to make decisions and exercise their judgment. And, I don't know that it's fair for us to intervene on a specific matter. So I think given that we're not the body with the authority to issue this direction to the ZBA, I would be hesitant to do it. I think it's hard to get people to serve on boards and committees if they know in general that they're just going to be told what to do by their appointing authority. And obviously the ZBA members are very familiar with the affordable housing, the housing production plan, with the Affordable Housing Trust. But I do think that meeting on the 15th should address some of these concerns, because I think in the ordinary LIP project process, there would already have been kind of a pro forma. There'd already be this stuff laid out. And I recognize, we've looked at lots of these, and so we kind of understand how the math works, what the limitations are, what the restrictions are that both the state imposes in terms of the developer's ability to make a profit, and what the tax credits, just to the earlier question about who benefits from the tax credits, it's essentially a way of financing projects that are not financeable by themselves. So if you do an ordinary market rate housing development, you're going to get bank financing because you're going to be able to sell the units for enough money to pay back the bank. The reality is a project like this does not generate enough rents that any bank in its right mind would lend money to be able to develop it, because the rents simply aren't high enough to pay it back. And so the state, in lieu of actually directly paying out the money, provides these tax credits to a developer who can then sell those tax credits to an investor who can then sell them to somebody else who has a large tax bill, and that person down the road can get their tax benefit from it. So it is a state-funded, state-sponsored financing mechanism for otherwise unfinanceable projects, which is why, kind of to my comment earlier, if we don't go this route, the only way anything gets done there is through Medfield tax dollars. The state is not going to step in to build anything here. The reason this model has been developed for private development on housing authority land is because the state is not providing money for it, and there's not other sources of funding for it. So I think the only guidance I would give to Mr. McMillan again is that should be a robust meeting on the 15th to address these kinds of concerns. Mr. Sorrell is about to tell me we can't do any of that, and I'm wrong, and it's illegal, and we should stop.
No.
Oh.
No. I just, for the benefit of the audience here, though, I just want to make it clear that safe harbor, assuming that the town is in it, is a right, but you're not, the town in the form of the ZBA is not compelled to invoke it. So that the board has the ability or the discretion to make a determination that, notwithstanding that they don't have to approve the project because we're in safe harbor, that there are some public benefits that warrant going forward with the project. And so there is that discretion, whether, in this case, it happens to be in the ZBA. If they determine that they want to invoke safe harbor, then they have to give written notice to DHCD within 15 days of the opening of the hearing. And then the applicant can challenge whether or not the town's in safe harbor, and then DHCD makes the ultimate determination.
So could I propose something, and this is just a straw man for the two of you, in terms of what we just have done tonight? I think going in, we were originally going in with the possibility that we would either vote to recommend to the ZBA that they not invoke safe harbor, or we might have recommended that they do invoke safe harbor. Mike, your comments to me basically, I'm going to try something and tell me if it's the right message. Your comments to me are that we're not going to tell the ZBA what to do one way or the other. We're choosing not to influence them that way. And I think there's three main points I took away from the discussion. And in a way, we're throwing the horns of the dilemma to the ZBA, I suppose. But first off, recognize the effort you've put into putting a proposal together that makes sense under the circumstances that, to fund what would otherwise be a non-financeable project. Recognize, Candace, and Lisa, the compassionate message you sent around the seniors that need this and would benefit from this, and there is, in fact, a real benefit to the town if we can come up with this kind of housing in this kind of a circumstance, and recognizing particularly that the people that are in the neighborhood are raising pretty consistent, legitimate, coherent concerns, especially around the mass and the size of the project. I think we could get in lots of debates on some of the other specifics, but especially around that. If there's a nut that to be cracked here, it's to figure out how to do all that other good stuff in a way that does not cause any harm, aesthetic, especially financial perhaps, to the people in the neighborhood. And basically what we're doing is referring to this as EBA, saying, given what's come out of this discussion, we'd ask you to take all those concerns seriously and work to find a way to reconcile those in order to identify a path forward.
Yeah, and look, they have the benefit of the comments, they've got the benefit of the housing production plan, of the various steps that have been taken, which obviously each one of those projects has gone through the ZBA, so they're familiar with them. And I think the reality is, you know, it's gonna be unresolvable ultimately, I think, right? I mean, there's not always a situation where you can kind of come to the end and everybody's happy. You know, it's a saying in pizza, my profession, that the sign of a good settlement is everybody's unhappy. And sometimes the reason it's a dilemma is because you just can't bridge the gap, right? You're either going to have the aesthetic concerns of the neighbors prevail, and then the people who would live in this housing aren't going to live there and they'll find someplace else to live. Or the aesthetic concerns of the neighbors aren't going to prevail, and they're going to be unhappy to look at it, maybe permanently unhappy to look at it, and really honked off, Gus, to use one of your favorite terms, permanently, right? And again, you always try to think of other things that have come up. I mean, you know, we went through this with the public safety building as well, right? In that, I think the original reaction to the public safety building was like, my goodness, what the heck is that? I think a lot of people still think that way, and you still get comments about, what the heck is that? Other people, you sort of get used to it because it's there. So I don't think we should, I don't think the ZBA has to come to a conclusion where everybody's going to say, yes, we all agree and we're all happy. Somebody's going to end up unhappy in the process for whatever the result is. And you sort of have to balance the degree of unhappiness and what is causing that unhappiness. And so balancing that aesthetic concern, against creating housing opportunities for an underserved population.
So that makes sense to me, except for one point. We are not at the either or point yet.
Nope.
So we walk out of here, for those of you who live in the area, we're asking you to be as broad-minded and as creative and collaborative as you can be. Right, you're not walking out of here with, well, this is it, and it's either or. If there's new ideas that can be presented, let's figure out what they are. So everybody walks out under a little bit of pressure, I guess.
Right, but I do think, and I know it's an uncomfortable topic to talk about. I've been through a lot of these meetings. I think that there are some concerns never going to be resolved. I think there's always an ever-present concern that someone in your position is always trying to put something over on the town, and that you're in business. For now, we're a capitalist country. I'm a capitalist. I have no objection to how people make their living and all the rest of it. But there's always that concern. Well, gee, the only reason you want 45 units is greed. You got to maximize your amount of money. And I think that may be true, and I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but I think answering some of those questions, it's not going to satisfy the aesthetic concerns, but I think it will, to the point of having some data to back up what you're talking about, explain, okay, look, I still don't like it, I understand it, you're not going to be, buying a 500-foot yacht off the profit you're going to make on this particular development. I mean, I think looking at the rents people are going to pay, probably couldn't buy even a small sailboat. So I don't know how much that costs, but I imagine it's less than the yacht. But yeah, I understand. But when you haven't answered those questions, you haven't laid out that piece of it, and you haven't read 50 pro formas for these kind of developers as I have, and haven't sat through all these hearings, I understand where they're coming from. And again, can be an uncomfortable conversation. Not to repeat myself, that is something that comes out through the process we normally run with the trust. But I think that's a real concern, and I think you ought to answer those kinds of questions, even apart from just the technical site questions, kind of understanding where that's coming from.
I'm going to suggest we close this discussion off.
For the second time.
For the second, yeah, it took about a little better than half an hour to bring this one through. I'd like to thank everyone for being here and for the comments. Brian and Candace, you've been standing up for an hour and a half now, and thank you very much for your
Thank you,
information.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board. I appreciate it again.
All right, for those of you who are still here for more fun and games, we have more on the agenda. In fact, this was only the second item of the three-page agenda, but we'll be a lot faster going forward from here.
I think we'll be a lot lonelier for some of these other agenda items.
Give us a minute for the dust to settle here. And John Thompson, wherever you are, you're up next. I think this was an update on the State House. Was it Fred? Well.
No, it's John Tom.
Yeah, can we take Nate?
Take Nate? You like this stuff. You're usually here all the time. I was missing, yeah. I'm trying to make up for it tonight.
That had nothing to do with the length of the meeting, though.
All right, John. I'm assuming that this is a relatively concise, brief update, or do we?
It's going to be very quick.
Okay.
The hospital is still there.
And then.
It's still there, and I'm probably going to be there till like sunrise this morning. We have some work going on Hospital Road tonight. The kind that you sit in the theater and watch. My two items tonight are, first of all, I don't know if you've been back and looked at the condition of the Overlook Park, but the state has neglected some of their obligations in the land disposition agreement that we signed with DCAM as far as maintenance and operation of the Overlook Park. The grass is very tall. There were certain promises made as far as maintaining and monitoring the site with the public involvement group from Medfield, and they haven't kept that. So we've asked Peg Stolfer to write a letter to the commissioner to have the commissioner of DCAM come back out and speak to the town of Medfield. And I just am asking the selectmen to read and support that letter so that we can have the commissioner come out and give us an update on where they are with the obligations that they signed up for with the town. Second item tonight is that there are certain parcels of land in town that are town-owned parcels that are not being adequately maintained in my purview as far as cutting these parcels. I mean, the name of the town is Medfield, it's not Medwoods. And if we don't cut these parcels, they will quickly, within a few years, become wooded. And once they're wooded, we will no longer have these open fields. And these fields include the Medfield Reservation, the land at well number 6 along Route 27 when you're driving into Sherborne on the right, just north of the State Hospital Cemetery, and the land at the Sledding Hill and the large oval that is in front of McCarthy Park. These are parcels that formerly had been cut by a farmer named Mr. Matt Mayo, and he's no longer able to do that. He was cutting some of the grass on parcels A1 and A2 that are east and west of the hospital property, but he's no longer doing that for the state, and that's partly because the state is in the process of transferring those parcels to the Department of Conservation and Recreation. And so the state doesn't want to engage in a license with the farmer because their thought is that that license would only be very short and temporary as they transfer those parcels to DCR. Then licensing will have to happen with the Department of Conservation and Recreation. So for our part, I think we need to consider who and how are we going to maintain these open space parcels that need to be cut. What happens with these fields as they go fallow is you get a lot of what's called Queen Anne's lace that grows. It's a white flower in the summer, and that mixed with hay is no longer usable for forage for cattle or for horses. It can't be used, and that's part of the process of turning these fields into, you see a lot of nice black-eyed Susan in the field and things that don't mix with hay. And it will start to transition into emergent forestry instead of open grassy fields. So just wanted to put that out there and have you guys at least have a discussion about the best way for the town to manage these open space parcels. And I think you're familiar with the big field that's near well number 6, and across the road from that, the Medfield Reservation, which is sort of a hill where Route 27 used to rise up over the hill and then cross the Charles River, the old trace of the Route 27 road, North Meadows Road, I think it was called at the time. That's it.
Bill?
I'd like to expand on that just a little
Get a microphone over there.
I thought the state not living up to its obligations is like the Bill Massaro bat signal. Immediately.
It's worse than a bat signal. It's an air raid siren. It's everything all at once. Let me just expand on a couple of things. So I'm going to give the state the benefit of the doubt and say that the transfer of John O'Donnell, who was in charge of all the environmental issues, to the Department of Mental Health from DCAM, and the retirement of Mary Beth Clancy, who was essentially the property manager, created a vacuum that DCAM has filled, but I believe with people at substantially less levels of responsibility and with less knowledge of working within the system. One of them is new to state government. So we have been struggling now for many months for things that we were typically getting done very quickly. And I'll give you an example. So back in March of this year, we finally managed to get the PIP process reinvigorated, and we made comments on their closeout of the C&D area. That was basically somewhere, let's see, 225 I made my comments, and the town made its comments on 314. We have not gotten a response to our comments. We have not seen the final of the report. So they have fallen out of the PIP process and the response that they owe us. They've told us, for example, now that they need access to the area below the laundry parcel because the remediations they tried in the past haven't worked. They are estimating somewhere along the lines of 2.5 to 3 years before they'll know whether the property is sufficiently clean to ultimately transfer the laundry parcel to the town. The problem is that the temporary access road that is on our property that lets them get back there to do their injections and their maintenance and their monitoring of the groundwater expires 12/1 of this year. We had commitments from the prior property people at DCAM that they would have their own access road built before the end of 2019. We had a commitment from the current environmental person that we would get a letter from DCAM that essentially would say, this is our plans for the road. The town will have the design input that they requested for the location of the road on DCAM property. And we would get a letter requesting extension of the use of the temporary road until they did get their new road built and what was the date of their new road. All of this, we haven't heard a word. So we're getting nowhere with that. So the letter that we've asked PEG to generate hits all of the things that they haven't done, whether it's the PIP process, whether it's the issues of the access road, whether it's the extension of use of the temporary access road on our property, all of these items, a letter for the town to send with copies to our representatives. Because the last thing I want is to get DCAM in here and start talking about all the things that they haven't done without somebody backing us up. Denise has offered to me at any time that we needed her to go in and speak to the commissioner, DCAM, that she would do that.
I've spoken to all of them, they're aware of what's going on.
So I would like to lay out what we're looking for, where DCAM has fallen down for the commissioner with a copy to Denise, so that Denise also now has an agenda basically to discuss. And to me, that is the most important thing, is to get the letter out. Where the meeting is, when the meeting is kind of secondary to first getting the letter out and establishing where they're falling down on the agreement. The other comment I want to make...
Before you move on,
Yeah.
Bill, John, it kind of is important at least to know what it is. We want the DCAM commissioner to come, and originally I think you said a town meeting, but you didn't mean like a public town meeting. You meant so we'd want the DCAM commissioner to come out here and meet with who?
Well, it would be nice if you
I would
had
suggest
a
the Board of
representative
Selectmen.
there, the Board of Selectmen, and also the public. I think the public should have an opportunity. A lot of people are concerned about, the hospital is getting almost 500 visitors a day. And they are largely going back to that parking area in the back and making use of the park. And it's just not maintained at all. If you go back there, the grass is up to your chin now. And we spent a lot of time in mediation laying out our expectations for how that would look and be managed. And they invested an awful lot of money in plantings, landscaping and planning for that park. And most of it is gone now because it's been overgrown by weeds and lack of maintenance. So it's really a meeting that, here, maybe on the way we had those public meetings in anticipation with the construction of the park, have the commissioner come here and meet with us. And I'm not sure it needs to be a formal meeting, but there needs to be some exchange so that it reaches their level of concern.
So the issue I'm wondering about is whether that's actually a meeting. I agree the Board of Selectmen should be there. So Billy, you better be there. John, you need to be there. Obviously, Christine, you're going to be there. But rather than a public meeting where we put the DCAM commissioner up so that everybody can trash what's going on, it would be better to have our representatives there.
Sure.
Have a sit-down meeting with the DCAM commissioner with a visit to the overlook.
Yes.
Either before or after. And the point would be, in essence, it's a private meeting. I mean, it's fine if people in the public want to come, but I wouldn't set it up as kind of, let's put her in a pillory or him in a pillory.
The important thing is to put them on, to me, this is a show cause. The equivalent of a show cause letter for somebody slipping schedules, failure to perform under a contract, which is basically what they've done. The mediation agreement that we signed calls out all of the duties that they're required to perform under the long-term operation and maintenance. They incorporated that in all of their applications that they made to the Corps of Engineers, to DEP. Their notice of intent included the mediation agreement and that operations maintenance schedule. And they have not conformed. I want to send them a note of where they have fallen down and everything else. The meeting is secondary. I mean, I'd be willing to go in there and talk to her if that would resolve the issue. But the first thing I want is for her to understand where her people are falling down on the job and not performing. Secondarily, to make sure that our representatives specifically know what those items are and that we have told DCAM what those items are and that we have told the commissioner what they are. And I'd be more than happy for Denise to walk in and shake hands with the commissioner and say, hi, I'm just checking up on the status of this, what's going on. And then we can have our meetings. But the first thing to do is to get the letter written and get the letter sent out. And it should go out under the town, under the town's name. I want to talk about the mowing and the transfer of the property. I don't know what the schedule is for DCAM to transfer the property to DCR. I talked to John about this earlier today. My understanding was, for example, that they could not transfer any piece of property that had an open MCP hazardous material release on it. All right. Parcel A2 still has the PCB
VOCs.
VOCs, excuse me. Still has the VOCs down below the laundry parcel. So A2 still has an MCP uncompleted. So I don't know if they're ever going to transfer that. You know, we're going to look again and make sure, see what the regulations are, so whether they can transfer it with some kind of a, a limitation or some kind of a restriction or whatever. But DCAM has to address this issue. That property isn't, if it is in fact, it won't be transferred to DCR for 2 years if that is in fact the stipulation. Minimum 2 to 3 years. I don't buy this excuse that they don't want to enter a license agreement for a year or 6 months or whatever to get the fields mowed because they're going to be transferring to DCR.
I think that there's actually an issue with the applicant who is doing the mowing. So
Well,
it's
no, I
separate.
understand that. But I mean, John, I had suggested to John that there were some people he might be able to talk to find out who else is in that business. The issue with Mayo in the mowing was he was reluctant to put fertilizer down on the field, which would have ameliorated the growth of non-productive hay or non-worthwhile hay, like Queen Anne's lace and everything else. He, last year, fertilized the fields, A1, A2, and the field behind our building, with the anticipation that he would be the person who would be haying the fields in the future and everything else. I don't know what happened with DCAM.
There's a little more history to that, and I don't want to speak
But
about
I don't,
Mr.
no,
Mayo
but
in
I don't
public
care. I
setting.
don't care. He's not the person anymore. The fields have been fertilized. It would be very, very appropriate to find somebody, whether it's DCAM or DCR, now. DCAM should be out soliciting to get those fields mowed. If it turns out to be a 6-month license or whatever, so be it. So they're causing irreparable harm to those fields.
So that's a,
So
and
before
remember,
we
that's
go
a
too
separate
deep in this,
agenda.
why do we care?
Well, if the fields go fallow, it's prime agricultural land, and at some point, those fields will probably be returned to some sort of agricultural use.
But why do we care?
Well, the other issue is that
we're talking about state fields.
Right, right.
So
Well, I
in
think it
terms
bears-
of our discussions
But that
here,
same
I
person-
Gus,
that
I
same-
think it bears on the value of the property, to be honest with you. In other words, if we're gonna put a $200 million development up there on that property, to have an emergent forest going on, encroaching on that property, will not add to the value of the property. It will actually
Fields
detract
will.
from it. Because it will look like an abandoned field when the trees start to get 6 to 10 feet high, and they're invasive trees. So, when you drive down Route 128, and I don't know if you notice trees, but you get sumac and Norway maple and things that are invasive that will take over a field, and just make it look
So
like
let me
it's
tell you why I'm
abandoned.
asking. I understand all that. Let me tell you why I'm asking. You're describing a new DCAM staff that's perhaps less experienced and is clearly falling down on its obligations to us. And that alone is a long list of things that we're writing a letter to go get the DCAM
Yes.
commissioner involved in.
That's one
When
of
we
them.
start then editorializing, however valid that might be, about what they're not doing with their own fields, I don't think that helps us.
No, but I guess I was addressing their excuse for why they weren't doing anything. All right, and I'm not saying we're going to do that in the letter, but let me expand on what I think the issue is. Number one, we have the overlook that needs to be mowed. All right, it specifically calls out in the mediation settlement and in the specification basically for what they have to do for maintenance and everything else. No trees, no deep-rooted trees can grow there. 95% of the plantings that they did should be still there after 5 years. I would say it's 0% right now of everything that they planted. So they basically lost, 4 years now since everybody patted themselves on the back for the great job they did on the overlook. I also, by the way, had provided Peg with copies of the Environmental Business Council giving an award to DCAM for their work on the Overlook project, and Charles River Watershed Association giving DCAM an award for their work the year before on the overlook. So everybody, and the commissioner and everybody else in DCR were willing to jump up there and take credit for this wonderful thing that they've done, and they basically let it go to hell. So it's gone to hell. We need to have the overlook area maintained, replanted and maintained. Now, if they hire the same person to mow what's there, that they hire to do their fields, that's fine with me, all right? So, but everything is wrapped in together with basically the neglect of the property.
I guess I'm suggesting that whatever communications we have with DCAM right now should be focused on our specific issues
Yes.
with DCAM.
It will.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah, and that would be the overlook, yes. And then just bear in mind that that is separate from town-owned parcels that have the same appearance right now. And so those parcels need to be managed. And you know, technically forestry needs to be managed too, because when you have a lot of old trees like they have on the Cape and they don't manage forestry, what you get is what they saw with a tornado, is, you know, it's not flood water that's gonna cause a problem, it's big trees across roads that prevent ambulances from getting to their destination. So tree management is really important, but also open space field management is important.
If the
Question,
town had a need
do
to
we
have
have anybody in the town that actually has the role or the expertise?
Conservation Commission is charged with maintaining the huge numbers of town-owned land. The problem is that they aren't funded. I happen to live with a member of the Conservation Commission who tells me all the time that you charge us with maintaining these, you don't give us any money to do it, so it's a
And
problem.
I think several of the departments who would probably push that maintenance to would tell you the same thing, that we don't fund them to do this kind of thing. I mean, look at the public safety building. We put in great plantings, we haven't maintained any of it.
The ponds were getting all kinds of huge growth of plants that were on the surface of Baker's Pond. And we actually then spent some money to get rid of those, and then the recession, the Great Recession came, and we stopped spending as much money. I asked Deb about that the other night, and she tells me we're still spending some, but it's not what we were.
I think the town needs to make a decision if they still need those areas that were being mowed before, the town-owned property, if they still need that land mowed now. And if the town says, yes, we need it mowed, you have to figure out how you're going to get it done. It would be nice if the same guy who wound up doing it for DCAM and everything else did it for us. My understanding of the way this worked before was it basically cost nobody anything because the farmer used all of the hay from all of the properties, whether it was the town property or whether it was the DCAM property, to it. That essentially was his pay.
And I think that for the town, some fields in town, like maybe the Homequist, that the DPW actually might be the people that are mowing that.
They did.
Correct.
They historically did.
So I think we already know there's a bit of a
Yes.
random, incoherent allocation of responsibilities and that we have to get sorted out. And John, the mowing piece is one thing, but that doesn't deal with the forestry piece that you're talking about. The stuff you're talking about that needs to be cleaned out, that's not
Yeah.
commercially valuable wood. This is scrap wood or
Right.
crap wood that's.
Right,
that's
because
coming up.
if you don't,
Right.
typically you should have an open space and forestry management plan. Because if all the tree growth is old growth, there's no emergent growth coming up. So you need to thin out a forest so that you have some young growth and some old growth. When it all becomes old growth, it starts to fall, and when you don't want it to fall. If you have that up against roadways, you know, that's where your vulnerability plan comes into play, is what happens in a storm.
Yeah, we have the issue with all the access paths. I have one next to my yard right now, is a jungle. If you didn't know there was a path there, the vines wouldn't
Yeah.
pull you in.
It's been a bad year too, because we've had so much rain. So all this growth is just, it's overwhelming this year, how much, you know, weed growth and undergrowth has come up in everybody's yards and along the roadways, so. Anyway, I just wanted to put that out there for you. I have to get back up there now. and,
John, is this, not to throw work at you,
Yeah.
but in terms of literally scoping what we're talking, or like I could probably find places that have old trees growing in them, but
Yeah.
I wouldn't know whether it's all of it.
Yeah.
Do you have, or can you come up with, here's the places, here's what's needed, and it's not to do it, just to scope it, so if we're going to have discussions around who's responsible for what, that we actually know what we're
Yeah,
talking about?
I had a list from the assessor's office when I was working on some animal control information of the town-owned parcels.
Oh, maybe
But I
that,
think,
maybe that
I
alone
think
is
Leslie
good.
has a map, or Medfield Forest and Trails has a map of the.
It's in the new open space plan that they're working on
Yeah,
as
I think
well.
that would be a good place to start, Gus, because you could then see, you know, what are these parcels we're talking about as far as open space? And I can talk to Deb or someone else or Leslie on the Conservation Commission to get an idea of where these open space parcels are.
I mean, I can see us allocating money for a chainsaw, work gloves, and steel-toed boots for Deb for a short-term solution, but,
Pete, let me know how that goes.
I can
Okay.
let her know I was just putting up a trial balloon there.
I'll let you guys move
okay.
on.
Thanks,
Can we
John.
get your endorsement at least on the letter?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, do you want to vote, or just this?
I don't.
Do you want to see it, or do you want to authorize me to send it sight unseen?
No, I'd like to see it.
Okay.
Yeah, but not because, I just like to see what we're saying, because I think we need to play a big role in that conversation, so sure. Yeah.
What's the timing for sending out the letter?
Gotta get it first.
Yeah,
No, I know, but just from our meeting schedule, our next meeting is August 13th?
I don't think they'll make it. I don't think you'll have it in that amount of time, because we're gonna need to, we're gonna, number one, I'm not sure how far she's gotten into drafting it yet.
So that
So the
week.
29th.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
John and I are gonna wanna take a
Perfect.
pass through it to make sure it covers all of the key issues and everything.
So I would
It's probably
shoot-
the meeting after the.
So I would shoot for the 29th.
yeah, that'd be great.
That's what I
Okay.
would think.
That's great. Good.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you, John.
Yeah, thank
All
you.
right. Thank you for coming, but also thank you for everything you've
Well,
been
thank you.
handling
Go to
here.
the hospital, walk around.
Okay. All right, Fred.
John, come here, one sec. Take this. This was in-
All right, I'm here representing Medfield Energy Committee, specifically the Medfield Energy Committee, Medfield State Hospital Subcommittee. And Cynthia Green and David Temple are here also with the Energy Committee.
Thank you all for sticking it out so far.
Okay, thanks for putting us high up on the agenda. No, we're only the fourth item here, the fourth, wow.
Yeah, we're moving pretty fast tonight.
So there are two things that we'd like to ask. One is just a letter of information that we sent that you should have in your packets. Just letting you know that the Energy Committee is looking in this direction, looking at the potential for a carbon footprint at the Medfield State Hospital. We think it's hugely important to do so, and as a matter of fact, you know, here for 2 hours we've talked about new construction, both municipal and private, semi-private development, and so the Medfield Energy Committee has been around for 11 years now, but we've had very little input really to new construction. We have taken our mandate to reducing municipal energy expense, and we've done a very good job. And what's the number we have here? In 2008, Medfield energy expense was 1.2 million, and then 9 years later, in 2017, it was 670,000, a 44% reduction. So we got a lot of stuff done, and we're continuing to do that. We're part of, you know, we're now a green community, so we're mandated to continue to reduce our energy expense. But as we look forward, and those of us who've been in the energy field, things have changed so rapidly and so radically in the last few years. It no longer makes sense to only be doing ECMs, energy conservation measures, one at a time. I mean, it's good to do that, but it's also good to look forward, because from a carbon point of view, our window of opportunity to do something for the planet is very small. The most generous expectations are 10, 12 years at the most. New construction, and you happen to have that slide still up there, if it's built today, even to current energy codes, which are much better than they were just a few years ago, that will mean a significant carbon footprint for how long is that facility going to last? You hope 50 years? In other words, and I'm jumping ahead here now, that I said that things have changed rapidly, and what I mean by that is that building codes have not kept up with technology. Today, if someone wanted to, they could build any new facility, virtually any new facility, any type of facility, to what we call passive house standards and probably net zero. And maybe even zero. And those are all three different aspects of what we call low carbon standards. But they're significantly further ahead than just building code standards. So the opportunity there is tremendous. Any new construction to go much further than building code would require. So we're not the only communities looking at this. We've in the last 3 months, we've been doing a lot of investigating, talking to experts, and we've found that there are other major developments happening right now, and Newton is the best case that we've stumbled across. They've got 2 different totally private developer developments going on. Each one, I think over 16 buildings, mixed use. And one case, and in both cases, the town, with a lot of civic engagement, approached the developers and said, we'd like you to try to meet these standards. And the developers, at least initially, said, gee, that must cost a lot of money. Why would we do that? And then they, just with a little bit of, or the right amount of interaction, over a short period of time, that they were explained, these, what I'm trying to, I'm giving you the broad strokes here, that current thinking is that you can get to net zero without significant new costs, if any, additional costs, if any, and it's the wave of the future. So if those developers, they were convinced, at least one was definitely convinced, the other one they're waiting on, but the convincing is that if they want to be building into the future, they might as well get ahead of, be on top of the game. So this is the introduction I wanted to make, and we put it in a letter form, just saying these are the directions we want to go, so that you know. We want to, ideally, we'd like to continue this kind of inquiry, speaking to experts, and coming back with a proposal or series of proposals back to the Board of Selectmen to say that this is what we'd recommend for new construction. But so it might be municipal, might be private. We're not anywhere near close to recommending that now, but we want to go in that direction. And that was the first item on the agenda.
Questions, comments?
No.
I have questions, comments.
Yes.
First off, so the focus for that would be new construction, not, I got confused with the reference to the state hospital.
Yes, and the state hospital is the single example that we're working on most, we'd like to
Not
work
new
on
construction.
most intensely. What's
It's not
that?
new construction, we're talking about 19th century buildings here. We're not talking about new construction at the state hospital.
So, so the,
Well, but there's a difference between new construction and doing something to 19th century buildings.
so let me get into that gets us into the second topic, if that's okay.
Well, now then, let me ask my second question before we get there.
Sure.
How does this connect with the initiatives going on at the state to regulate this?
Go ahead,
State's at least under consideration of putting energy conservation regulations into effect for energy usage by buildings. So how does this intersect?
Sure. So let me jump in by mentioning that we've been in touch with the Energy Office, and they actually propelled us in the direction that I'm talking to you about right now. The Energy Office, saying that it's a cool slide to see. Energy codes over time have gotten more and more restrictive, and they're headed down to a net zero, but they're not going to get there fast enough if we just go through the regular building code cycles. So that's a part answer. Another part is that there are the incentive system, which is mostly through Mass Save, is undergoing significant shifts right now to incentivize this kind of thing, the low carbon route. And Eversource, our utility, is very excited about what we're talking about right now and wants to assist us. Exactly how that's going to play out, exactly what form that could take, we haven't gotten to that yet. But there are other state agencies that we've spoken to. MAPC is very interested and excited in this direction. And Mass CEC, Clean Energy Center, So we've had extensive consultations with each one of these. Is
So,
that an answer for you?
Well, yeah, so I have one suggestion as far as the state hospital goes, that, I mean, we're gonna give you reactions tonight on where you're going, and that's all fine, but I would recommend you try to meet with the development committee around the state hospital. I have a concern about the state hospital being a target only because we already have the historic factions pushing in a direction of preserving buildings. If in any way, shape, or form this thing adds cost to any kind of a project up there, we don't need that.
But it sounds like, though, what you're proposing is that you're gonna continue doing research and make some recommendations. And then we can either take or leave.
That's step one.
But the focus,
Yeah.
I'm not disagreeing with that direction for trying to get at it. I'm saying that if I were doing that research, and I were doing that research in the context of new construction, that would be a more productive place, I think, than trying to figure out and second guess how a developer who's renovating a 19th century hospital with buildings that are being preserved, you know, you have a lot of pressures.
So let me try to.
That's the only thing I'm worried about.
I'll do a quick answer for that because it could be a big, it should be a big, long answer.
Yeah.
And that's where our investigation wants to go.
Okay.
We don't have the big, long answer. And, but according to the plan, which I know is not set in stone at all, but the plan envisions a lot of existing buildings, masonry, brick, old, historic, and they have to maintain their historic character. We understand that. And it also envisions a lot of new construction.
Not a lot.
Well, number of facilities, number of actual buildings, it sounded like, from the plan's point of view, there were.
Not a lot of new ones.
Something in the neighborhood of 20 or 30 duplex, you know.
Oh,
condos.
Okay.
That's what I meant.
If that's what you're targeting and not the whole development.
It is, no, but.
Short answer would be good to talk to the development committee to talk
Yes.
about what you, and if your answers are something that helps drive the cost of a project down, then.
Right, but I would suggest that if they are gonna talk to the development committee, that happen after November. Because the development committee, I mean, they have to focus on the fall town meeting and all of those issues, and, you know, I don't want them to get sidetracked by something that is.
And I appreciate that.
Future issue, right?
Listen,
You know?
I've talked to Bill at length, and I've followed, not as well as I should perhaps, but the mountain of issues before the town regarding Medfield State Hospital is huge. We don't want to add or complicate any of that. And all we're looking for really is your awareness that we want to follow this path and see where it leads. But that brings up the second item, if I may, because it addresses your question. There is an annual grant cycle from the Energy Office, and we did this once 5 years ago. We got one of these grants 5 years ago. Anyways, it's available right now, and that's the second item is to see if you would approve the, and I don't know if it made it into the packet, but this is the final page of the grant application.
Thank you.
And does anybody else want to see a copy?
Yeah, I want to make a comment on this, like, if we're ready to get done.
So what we'd like to do here is, it's a maximum of $12,500 grant, and it's competitive, and it's time sensitive. In other words, the deadline happens to be August 1st at 9 a.m. And if you're done, if you submit your application by 9:10, you're probably lost. You've probably lost the opportunity. But anyway, we're looking for these two steps, one for $5,000 and one for $7,500. And so the first one would, and we'd through the grant, we would hire experts, and we got help from an expert, New Ecology is the name, to put these, the draft together of this. But anyway, what they would do is model, from an energy point of view, model the 3 different building types. And if nothing particular was done, or if high efficiency was followed, see what the differences are, and that would lead towards the second part, the $7,500, which would allow them to draft some language that could be integrated into requests for proposals if it should meet with your approval down the road.
But this is for what, though?
And, right, so the three types that they would, that we're looking to in part one there, is the existing masonry buildings, the new construction, and the multifamily types.
So we're back up at the state hospital? I'm saying
This is
what?
all new,
Where-
this is all for the state hospital, yes. And let me address that, Gus, because I didn't quite get to it. So from an energy point of view, a blank slate, a brand-new building, as I said, from an energy expert's point of view, it's pretty much the case, there's no reason not to go, why it couldn't be net zero at least. Now, an existing building offers all sorts of obstacles. In the case of a shell, and Bill, I don't know if that's the right characterization. It's a gut rehab. A gut rehab in many cases, ends up being a lot like new construction. The difference, of course, is the shell. And how much, so it will become and these folks that we could hire have a lot of experience with historic buildings and looking at how efficient a historic building can become and keep all the historic components of it. So that's getting that kind of expertise applied here for just a part of the $5,000 budget it amazed me that they thought they could do it for that much.
What's the window for spending the grant?
The time?
Yeah, like when do you have to spend it? Because it seems to me that it wouldn't do us any good to spend this until there's been a vote on the zoning. If this has any utility, it has a utility as part of the RFP process, as opposed to. I wouldn't. I'm not averse to free money from the state, but in terms of value to what the town is doing, to the extent that this is going to be useful, it's useful after zoning has been approved and as part of the either RFP or RFP evaluation process.
May 30th, 2021.
Wow, there we go.
2021. Thank you. The other
Just enough time.
But I'd put it the other way also, which is that so as I said, we've been doing this for 11 years. We've had, occasionally over the years, Medfield Energy Committee has had some input about some new construction. Our input generally hasn't gone that far. The opportunity that we've lost, I don't want to rack that up now, but it's significant. We don't want to keep losing those opportunities. So how to do it better, I propose is by way of whatever input we're going to have to get in towards the beginning stages, not the later stages. So for instance, how long is the Medfield State Hospital plan, the redevelopment plan? It's quite long. It has some mentions about energy, but it's not elaborate enough, at least by far, to really direct the energy part of the state hospital redevelopment. And even if it was, it would need updating now a few years later. So these things are changing rapidly, and this grant would give us what we would need to put in when we're ready. We don't want to start then, is what I suggest.
All right, so Fred and I had a very, very long conversation.
We have a very
yesterday.
interesting potential
I know
crossover
I'm looking for any
point.
more work, but I have no objections to getting the grant. What I am concerned about is going forward with a grant that's essentially, the majority of the effort is based on energy savings at the hospital, when I have no amount of assurances that the plan is going to pass. So I would be hesitant to submit a grant that says this is for the energy at the state hospital if nothing gets done there. So what I had suggested, and I'm going to suggest again, is that you make it generic, and that essentially you talk about maybe not 3 types of buildings, but 4 types of buildings, and put in single-family homes, because there's always a possibility that there'll be additional single-family home developments here. What are you going to do about zero on single-family homes? Do you want to? Do you want to cover that? And then in terms about the $7,500, I would take out the Medfield State Hospital development and just make it generic that says, basically any development that comes down the road that you will use to determine what the requirements should be there and everything else. And don't make it dependent on the state hospital, and don't tell the state you're making it dependent on the state hospital, because it may not happen.
Well, if I agree, but if we have 2 years to use the grant, and if you're right, nothing happens, the worst case scenario is just give the money back to the state, right?
Yeah, just give it back.
Oh, that's interesting.
Right. I mean, if it turns out the zoning doesn't pass, nothing's happening up there. There's nothing to do. You know, there's no energy decisions or advice to be made or given because nothing's happening other than the buildings are sitting there using no energy.
But you may have other things happening, though. I mean,
Yeah, you
have
might- you might-
pieces happening.
you might-
may
you might
have
be
other
doing
things
something-
in town happening. Get the money for the whole town.
Yeah.
Any development or future needs within the town, rather than just specifically at the
'Cause the
hospital.
reuse of the-
Hospital will still be covered, but I mean, just not make it the main focus.
The reuse of the Dale Street School may be going forward, and so that you could use the grant for that. Yeah.
The lessons to be learned, as I said, there's, currently there's the three types. The one very specific that needs the most study, or definitely needs study the most, is because it's so specific, is the masonry, is the brick buildings. The other two are generic types. They are generic types already. We're all gonna learn a lot from this process.
I'm not saying don't do it, I'm just saying be cautious about the language, that's all.
So Fred, I can see a couple of ways of going. If what you're saying is, well, we already would know, we already have ready answers for what a new school should do as brand-new construction, and maybe we even already have answers for what a new house going up should be based on just all the work people have done generally. If there's an interest in exploring the energy conservation or, energy reduction use of a rehab building like we have up at the state hospital, and it's not a lot of money going into it, but there's an answer to be had there so that we know, that's okay. But if the expectation of, my whole concern here is not making that, if a redevelopment project comes about up at the state hospital, not to have various factions or adding burdens onto it, because we already have some burdens added onto it in terms of the historic preservation expectations. And my concern is that we don't have, I'm not highly confident yet that we have an economically sustainable model for successfully redeveloping things up there without the town kicking in somewhere between $25 to $50 million in infrastructure cost. And I think, like, even if Pete and I thought 50 million was a good number to put in, I can assure you, I think that Mike wouldn't be on board with that. I think that the absolute tops is $25 million, because that's what it would cost for us to take, presumably at this point, that's what it would cost to take all the buildings down and just turn it into a green field, and then you could make some of that money back by selling the land, so.
And mowing it sounds like.
And even mowing it and get a recurring source of income. So my point there and all that is that whatever we might learn from something like this doesn't automatically translate into an expectation of a specification we'll throw on a developer, because it is a little different. It's not the buildings we're putting up, like the public safety building, at our beck and call. It's actually a commercial development opportunity that we're hoping to lure a developer into doing. So the more things we tell that developer how they have to do it, to the extent that they are cost-adding things, that's bad. To the extent that we say, we've got already some studies that show if you do it this way, you're gonna save money, well, that's good. And so that's the sensitivity. It's not, I absolutely am not going after you for what you're trying to do on the Energy Committee. I want to make sure that from a business standpoint around the redevelopment of the state hospital, we're not doing things that make that a less attractive picture than it already might possibly be.
But I think that's ultimately up to us, right? Because I mean, at the end of the day, whatever recommendations they make, we can simply say this is going to add too many costs to it.
But I wouldn't want you to
Thank
run
you for
off.
the work. And
But I wouldn't want you running off with one set of expectations and then 3 years from now saying, well, here's the requirements we should put in, and then have us say, oh, no, we're not gonna do that. I mean, you need to understand, if it's a net positive, we're probably gonna wanna do it. If it's not, I'm a little concerned about the discussions I've heard around the state, because the state side is talking about regulation. They didn't get into economics, but my guess is the state will do some things that are gonna add cost to building construction in the zeal to drive energy, get carbon neutral. Who cares if it adds cost? That's kind of what I hear in the comments.
I'm sorry,
I've heard
say that
from the
again,
state.
carbon neutral
If we
what?
want to get down to carbon neutrality, we want to get down and drive things down. Who cares what our regulations cost? And that's the attitude that I hear in the comments that I've been hearing, as opposed to, we have some really smart ways to basically be more efficient and actually build buildings at less cost.
Right, so.
If it's less
this
cost,
is-
you don't need to
This
force
is a
it.
route to start to answer those questions.
Yeah.
Without going this route, we won't get to answer those questions.
And my only point is, as long as you understand that's the route to start to answer the questions, until we know what you come up with and where you're applying it, you shouldn't expect that we're just going to embrace it if that, in the case of the state hospital, makes the development less attractive commercially. So if
Understood.
you're all okay with that, then.
Understood.
Hey, and
Any other responses?
you see where I'm coming from, right?
Yeah, I
Okay.
understand, but the gap between, toward net zero and conventional construction has been narrowing steadily.
As long as the solutions stand on their own in positive economic impact, I don't have a problem. It's when solutions start to take on, we're gonna coerce you into doing something because you're gonna have to spend more money that you don't wanna spend. That's the place that I wouldn't choose to start experimenting at the state hospital.
Fred came up at one of the meetings with a Pennsylvania report, which showed that actually the net zero was marginally less than conventional construction. Now, it could have been, that report could be an outlier, but it just.
If you get there, you shouldn't have to regulate it. You should just get the word out and people.
Well, actually, so that's interesting.
Yeah.
There are three reports that we came across. One is what David mentioned. That one only came about because of state intervention, state regulation. Let's put it that way. As a matter of fact, it was multifamily homes built by Pennsylvania. They go out to bid once a year for, they need, this many units in York, this many units in Pittsburgh, and,
It was the awarding of the low-income tax credits
and
that Brian's looking at, to
Yeah.
finance his thing. And the state of Pennsylvania awarded some extra points for people that did passive house. And all of a sudden, everybody in Pennsylvania is now doing passive house because it turns out it's cheaper.
Well, right, no, as a matter of fact, no, it
In
ended.
addition to being better, and you get the long-term savings because it doesn't cost as much
It was-
energy over time.
It was because the point system was installed, adopted, and then they went through, I think, 3 years, 3 rounds, and each year, the cost, because of the competition, because of the experience gained by those developers, that drove down the cost to below, of the low carbon cost is now below the standard cost. So that's amazing. The second study just came out a month ago. It's about affordable low-income housing in, is it just, yeah, but it's models. And it's also they talked to 100 or so people in the field. The consensus from all the experts is that with effort, and the range of costs, of incremental costs was 2 to 10%. That's what they found. But there was consensus among the experts that with effort, that'll come down to 0 soon. The third study, by the way, is out in 9 days from Massachusetts U.S. Green Building Council, and there's high expectation about that, and hopefully that'll be even more applicable to all types. So all of this is in flux. I hope you will give us the opportunity to pursue this grant.
We okay? We're okay philosophically.
I'm fine with it.
Needs a signature.
On-
Well, first you need a
And
motion.
all three
and
of
a
us?
vote. And a
From all
vote.
three, or is it ready to go right now? And when?
This meeting may not be over in time for the deadline, so you might want to get it
well,
before
what's,
it's
yeah, what is the deadline?
9
9 a.m. on Friday.
9
9 a.m. Thursday.
Thursday.
Okay, so we have to do it, Christine and I were just talking about my frustration with selectmen being presented with things with no time.
I'm sorry.
So I haven't read what you've written, because I picked it up like 10 minutes before I left.
Sorry.
However, I like what you guys are doing. I trust your judgment, Fred. We've had a discussion. There's no overinflated expectations for where this will go.
It's
I'm
not our
prepared-
money.
It's 10:30.
Not
Except
directly,
very
not
indirectly.
directly. I am prepared.
My experience, if you're awarded the grant, then you have a choice to accept it or
That's
not.
true,
so
that's true.
you'll have to
And
decide.
we've been advised by
Mark.
council that this is not the point of no return. So I will entertain a motion to to sign the grant?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye. Yep.
Aye, done. You need all our signatures or
Nope.
just mine? Just mine,
Just one,
just one.
I believe.
So I guess, I guess
Executive.
that's me. Okay.
The chairman, thank you.
It's, yeah, it's in your action item folder.
My action item. So we will get that signed, and I'll be signing those before I leave tonight, or tomorrow morning when I leave tonight.
Thank you very much. I
Okay,
appreciate it
thanks.
very
Thank
much.
you, Fred. Thanks, folks. All right, can I
Nate?
jump down? Yeah, I was gonna say, let's jump down to
Can we do
Nate
Nate,
here.
please?
It's like,
He is earning
Not
his
only-
appointment
not
as
only is
registrar of voters.
not only has he stuck it out, but he sat in the front pews. It's like-
See, if you'd sat in the back row, you would have gotten hurt a lot sooner.
Yeah, but he shows up anyway, so.
Okay. I believe, Nate, you have asked to be appointed as the registrar of voters. And any discussion?
Please accept Bill Gallagher's resignation
Oh,
first.
oh.
Before we, yep.
Is that in here too? Okay. We have a motion to accept Bill Gallagher's resignation as the registrar of voters.
Yeah, so moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Now we have an open seat.
With thanks for his service as
Yeah.
the registrar of voters. Now, the only and I asked Christine this, I don't think there's any complication. You're active in the Republican Party. You've been a candidate. There's absolutely no reason, Mark, why there's no conflicts. He can be registrar of voters, right? There's no issues.
Correct.
Okay. I'll entertain a motion to appoint Nate as
So
registrar.
moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Yep.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you very much, Nate.
Thank you, Nate.
Okay.
Thank you.
But wait, there's more. Okay, so that passed. Bill or Mel, is there any, we're just trying to be considerate now that it's almost 10:30. Anything in particular you need on the agenda that we needed to jump to for either of you?
I was just interested in the action
Just
item relative to the church.
I had a discussion right before the meeting. It's being held until the 29th.
Oh,
Oh, actually, I'm sorry. It's being held until September 17th.
even better.
Yes, September 17th.
So you have 3.5 hours to learn who's never At least Nate got to be registrar of voters at the end.
I thought you were just here for fun. I would have told you that.
Lars and then.
Yeah.
My company, he likes it.
Right.
Yeah, no, we're holding that until September 17th.
So I take it the request was for the Parks and Recreation to mow the lawn?
No,
Yes,
we
well-
just gave that up in the spring.
Was this a deliberate deferral until the end of the grass cutting season?
By me? No, although I was accused of that this evening. No.
I thought he was offering the.
September 17th.
I assume there's some reason why we deferred it rather than just tackle it head on.
They can't send anybody. There's
Oh,
some
okay.
vacations and other things, so the next available meeting they have that you're all here is September 17th.
September 17th, okay.
For those of you watching at home, mark that down in your calendars if you
Yes.
want to talk about lawn mowing at the Unitarian Church.
That will be one exciting discussion.
Off-track betting in the Himalayas. Smaller story, I'm sure you're following it.
Okay, back to the lineup here. We have a certificate of appreciation for Pastor Cakeley.
Cakeley?
Cakeley. I guess it's just a straightforward motion. Yeah.
So moved.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
You can sign it. It's in the.
Of course it is. Yes, I'll do that tonight or tomorrow morning, when we're done. Request from the town administrator and the police chief to participate in the oh, we already
Did
did
it.
that.
You already did that one?
I think the next one is Chief Carrico.
Oh, yes. There we go. Okay. Selectmen requested to vote to appoint Fire Chief Carrico as Medfield's Emergency Management Director. Christine, is there anything?
I have a little.
to expand that? Okay.
So as you know, Ray Burton was our emergency management director, and he retired at the end of May. Chief Carrico has been filling in as interim. I have been speaking with both Chief Garrett and Chief Carrico as to who is the most appropriate person to fill this, and we've all agreed it's Chief Carrico. He served as emergency management director in his prior positions. He's very interested and engaged and can't wait to get started on it. So
That seems to be.
it seems to be
most
more in fire
towns it's
departments.
the fire chief.
Yeah.
So I noted when Newton just appointed a new fire chief, they said
Franklin's
also
was.
appointed as the emergency management director.
Yeah, in fact, in doing our research, most fire chiefs, it's now fire chief / emergency management director as one position.
Because they've got all the equipment under them.
Mm-hmm.
And their operations are a little more in this, mindset.
Right.
Okay.
I would move to appoint Chief Carrico as Medfield's Emergency Management Director.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, that's done.
He does know that's coming, by the way, too.
the center being moved?
Yes,
Yeah, I don't think he's gonna wanna hang out over there in the.
that was part of the negotiations.
It's a man cave, I mean.
Yeah.
Just talk.
It's on.
It's
It's just
on.
for people at home.
It's for the
just,
TV.
Stacy Bazinet, 30 Oriole Road. Just a question about the EMS services. So do EMS services then report to that position, or do they report to a different position?
As in which EMS, the ambulance service, or they
Yes.
currently report to Chief Carrico?
Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
I don't know if this was your question, as fire chief though, not as emergency management director.
No, as fire chief, yeah. Yeah.
More for like disaster planning and response and that sort of thing.
Selectmen are requested to vote to sign the contract with oh, we already did that.
Next, Mogule's contracts next.
Yes.
Finally passed. Boy, I wasn't keeping my scorecard up. Mogul requests the Board of Selectmen to vote to sign the following contracts. First one, the rebid of the SERSG contract for FY20 water sewer treatment chemicals.
So you had already voted to award this contract and then authorize Mo to sign it. However, the original bid was thrown out due to a contractor that did not meet the requirements, so they had to rebid it. So you need to issue the new award.
Okay, and is this another signature? or
It's a
Moga?
signature, it's in
So,
the,
okay.
it's in the packet.
Motion?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
I pass. Next one, MTC Ops LLC, Walpole, Massachusetts, to assist the town to dispose of surplus vehicles and equipment. Town pays 12% of each item sold.
So moved.
Oh, wait, hold on, what's,
I've been involved with Mo on this a lot.
okay, why don't we
You say
just-
that with
why don't we
love.
just- Why are we paying 12% to get rid of surplus?
He's gonna basically auction the stuff online.
So we're paying the fee for it.
And is that, so we get, what is it, Municipid? I get inundated with emails from Municipid, which is auctioning things online. I didn't respond because I wasn't sure if that wasn't, so if we actually, 12% sounds like a lot to pay, that's all. I'm just curious whether that's the best online auction deal we
I
have.
don't know how much value obviously the maximum value that it has is less than $10,000 because that's the only authority there is, so
Right,
it's probably not a lot in real dollars.
so let me try asking the question
I-
differently.
so I
How did we
think in-
settle on them?
I think in Mo's research, this was the company that he felt the most comfortable working with and he has worked with in the past.
Okay. Worked with them in the past, okay, that I understand.
We required him to get insurance coverage and.
Which he did, yeah.
Okay,
So
all right.
yes.
So motion, I think you made a motion.
There
right?
was a motion.
I
made.
second it.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Yeah, aye. Okay. Environmental Partners Group, Inc., Quincy, Mass., landfill monitoring program in the amount of $31,800.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Yep.
That's for the old dump.
Okay, Par
Correct.
Corporation, Foxborough, Mass., Danielson Pond Dam Study, amount $16,250.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
And finally, Inspect Coatings, Inc., Campbell, Ohio, Mount Nebo Tank Rehabilitation, amount $513,900.
So moved, but I'd like to know what we're getting.
Second.
Sandblasting, painting, and safety feature improvements that will come for this fall season.
Safety feature improvements.
Yeah, he
Good,
said they'll be
excellent.
doing some, in addition to doing all that, they'll be doing some minor repairs and disinfecting.
And they're doing it under the authority of the consulting engineering firm for the
Yeah.
DPW.
Okay.
Environmental partner.
Give it a second.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Yep.
Passed. Okay. Discussion, Board of Health. Who starts that?
You asked for it to be on the
Yeah, well,
agenda,
so, okay,
so.
yeah, okay, just want to make sure. So we are down, we've accepted 2 resignations of Board of Health members. We're down to a single member of the Board of Health. So the context of this is all going to be around the reappointment of boards that we're going through. The only thing is, the Board of Health has bubbled up to the top because we basically have a single,
You don't have an active
sing-
board at the moment.
and so to the
She
extent
can't
that
run
the
it by
Board of
herself.
Health, to the extent that the Board of Health, in addition to simply being a board of people who have interest in issues regarding health in the town, is actually got a, regulatory responsibility. At this point in time, we don't have a functioning Board of Health. So the question is, what do we do about that?
Can I speak to that briefly, as to what I have done about that so far?
What you have done?
So
That's even better.
I have spoken to 2 prospective candidates
Okay.
for the Board of Health.
Yep.
Christine has to speak to them to give them more details about it. Both of them are tentatively interested in the position. Both of them have professional qualifications in the health field. I don't want to publicly say who they are because they may not be interested. If they're still watching, God bless you both, or either of you. So I have been trying to recruit people, and so I think we do need to recruit people. I'm hoping these two people will be interested, one of whom is known to you, at least. But we just haven't, they've been on vacation, and we haven't been able to connect with them, so anyway.
The question that I raised with Christine, I guess it was a couple weeks ago, is whether we should dissolve the Board of Health and reconstitute the Board of Health. Or whether, if it doesn't matter, then that's fine, but I do want to ask that question because this was an unusual development.
I have a question on that. If there's no Board of Health, doesn't it defer, become the Board of Selectmen? I think.
No, because there is a board of, the charter authorizes a Board of Health. So.
The town charter does.
Right.
Yeah.
So although it's called a Board of Health, they have, as somebody alluded to, a lot of regulatory authority that's not health per se. It's like drainage in subdivisions. They have exclusive jurisdiction over that. They have approval of designs of private septic systems. That's a very large part of what they do. Now, they do have outside consultants that they employ, but you really ideally need a range of skill sets on the Board of Health and not just a bunch of people from the health professions.
And speaking for myself, I realized that I had underweighted that kind of hard expertise, and I've realized I'm not sure that it's almost like we should have a Board of Health that's constructed to get those skills there, and that's not kind of how I think we got to where we are now. So the real issue is we need to have a Board of Health that can perform its core functions. We want to make sure that whoever we bring, we're not just incrementally fixing something where we still have gaps in skills. So
I think it's always been a problem to get engineers to serve on the Board of Health, which is, I mean, a lot of their functioning, as Mark says, is engineering.
Yeah, and we've put out, over the past several years, we've put out a number of calls for that kind of assistance that have gone unanswered. So I wouldn't have thought of dissolving it or reconstituting it. I think you'll still have the personnel question of, if people haven't been interested in serving on the current version of it, what would make it more attractive to somebody, who has that professional qualification? Because I know for a while there, we were trying to find septic engineers in particular.
Right.
And kind of came up empty in that regard in terms of volunteers in that department. So I'm certainly open to that discussion, but I think the bigger problem is the personnel question.
Okay, so what I'm hearing though is that we may have two people. We're optimistic, given that we don't necessarily have great confidence we could find exactly who we want anyway. We're optimistic. We're comfortable moving ahead with plugging the two holes. And
if they're interested, and we can review their background, review who they are, and if there's more people beyond those two, that'd be great, because I don't think we're limited to a board of three. We could have more than three.
You can have up to 5.
Up to 5. So, I mean, obviously, we're not limited to that, and one or both of them may conclude after speaking to Christine that they don't actually want to do it.
I'll do my best to recruit.
But yeah, I think
Okay.
I think it is a challenge to find that set of qualifications.
Okay. So then we'll just keep going down the road of seeing if those two candidates are interesting, and then the reappointment process.
And go beyond it and try to see if we get more than beyond the two.
Right.
I mean, I think.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know any septic engineers offhand in town.
Anybody with an engineering background, I mean, you can bring those skills to bear.
Pending town administrator evaluation, I think we're still pushing that off, I assume.
We can talk about it tonight. I did send you the evaluation form for you to start reviewing, and an update on where we were on the 6-month goals. And at our next meeting, we can talk about full fiscal year 20 goals.
I'm going to suggest we maybe defer that at least to the 29th when I'm back.
That's fine.
That's fine.
And goals. Okay, consent agenda. We have Medfield Public Library requests using the town gazebo on August 10th, 1 to 1:30 p.m. for the Charles River Chorale concert. They could have done that, and we wouldn't have detected it. They would have been done.
We wouldn't have even known.
I wouldn't even known.
Our
I would-
librarians are rule followers.
But their
impressed.
chorale doesn't apparently know very many songs.
But I'm sure they're really, really good. Just for the record, I'm sure they're very good. I'm just going to have to move my lunch date at the gazebo on August 10th now. But second, Owen Hawkins, manager, Seventh Wave Brewing, Medfield, requests a one-day malt beverage permit for the Brew Moon Hike at Rocky Woods, August 17th, 6 to 8 p.m. Next, Medfield High School football team requests permission to hold a fundraising car wash behind Town Hall on Sunday, August 25th, 9 to noon. Evelyn, you're the keeper of the back of the Town Hall hose schedule, right?
Yes.
And it's okay? That one's good? Okay?
So we don't want to hold these off pending the car wash policy?
I think we're gonna let these go for this fall, and
Okay.
we're gonna announce our new policy in January, so that
For the
they'll
next- for
have.
the next car wash season.
Next car wash
There we
season,
go.
they'll be ready to go.
These are all high school. These are high school. And then second, Medfield Student Council requests permission to hold a fundraising car wash behind Town Hall on Saturday, September 28th, 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. That's good? Okay. Block party permit requested for the Cypress Street neighborhood on Saturday, September 14th, 2 to 9 p.m. Rain date Sunday, September 15th. And we usually get like 5 block parties. People are slipping up this year.
They'll be
coming. Okay. I was going to say, I would have been
We're all centered around
disappointed
Medfield
if the
Day.
party, if the level of partying in Medfield.
September 14.
It is the
14th.
And we don't get invited to any of them. We get all these approvals, there's no invitation for the selectmen to join us for the block party, you know?
They don't realize, they don't realize how much, they don't realize how much fun we can be. Okay.
I think they do, and that explains the lack of invites.
Kathy and Abe
We'll have to
Schickel.
stop televising our meetings so we get more invitations.
They, nobody stays through to the bitter end. They don't see this stuff coming out. They signed off at 9 o'clock. Kathy and Abe Schickel request permission to hold the 7th annual Run Like a Maverick 5K on Sunday, May 3rd, 2020. 5K is held in memory of their daughter Elizabeth, who was a Montrose student and passed away in 2014. Mr. and Mrs. Schickel deeply appreciate the support of the Medfield community through the years. So,
I would move the consent agenda items.
I second.
all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, okay. That's good. Let's see, meeting minutes. Let's see, we have, where did I put them? Some of the ones you sent I haven't looked at yet because I found yet another email with more that I didn't get through. So I'll suggest we do the ones that you guys have probably
I have reviewed and
I have
marked.
edits from all of these,
I've-
from
yeah.
Pete and Mike.
So for some reason, I reviewed the January 15th minutes, but that's not on the agenda. Just
Okay.
my
I think,
luck, I
yeah.
did ones that we didn't need to do. Great. February 19th.
Approve them.
Huh?
I think it would be okay to approve them, because
Okay
all
to
three
approve
of you
them?
have
Okay.
issued comments on them, and
So I emailed
Yep, I
comments to
have.
you. So this was the January 19th meeting minutes. I had editorial changes that are of no consequence. I had 2 not particularly important substance. One was, Mike, when Christian Donner was talking about the support from the town, my memory is getting better. Well, no, because I thought one of your points was good that wasn't in here. Christian Donner had asked if the town would help, particularly with the rail trail, talking around DPW. You made the comment that we'd be happy to do that, and we all said, if DPW is willing to do it, that's great. We're not willing to order DPW to do it. You then further went on and said, as long as, they're not looking for tax dollars paying for this project, that he would not be supportive. And I said, because he thinks there are more pressing needs that need to be funded out of the tax levy. I thought that was an important point to make. And so I
He
had
was
it-
asking about whether, I remember
Right,
that.
right. And then the other minor thing I had was on the gun club. It said that I had talked with members past and present of the gun club, and in fact, I'd only talked to one past member, so I just corrected that, and that was all I had on that one. And Christine has it. So a motion to accept the minutes on the January 19th.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, great. The next one is February 19th. The next one, at least I'm ready to talk to, is February 19th. And I didn't have any changes on that one.
Move to accept February 19.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. That one passes. The next one I have is March 12th. March 12th, and I guess I didn't have any.
Move to accept March 12 minutes.
Second.
All those in favor?
Yep. Aye.
That one's good. And I did not have March 19th or 23rd, because that's in the pile I haven't got to, but I do have July 9th. And I
Move
had,
to accept July 9.
I think Pete would like dinner.
Oh, you weren't here, Gus. What were you doing? Did you watch the meeting?
I had some editorial, I simply had editorial comments on this one.
That's dedication right there.
You left out is in the, just for the record, under appointments, Selectman Marcucci read the public hearing notice into the record. This is the third year for this door-to-door. And then on the second page at the bottom, Mrs. Trewiler requested it said the appoint Mr. McNiff, and I thought it was probably the selection or the appointment of Mr. McNiff. Just because I'm not here doesn't mean you guys can't use good English here. And then on the third page at
when
the
you're not
top,
here, everything goes to hell.
top of third page, Selectmen discussed with Mark Sorrell whether the Board of Health will be able to meet with only one member remaining.
Okay. Fine with me.
Perfect.
And I can't vote because I wasn't there.
Oh, I already moved that we accept, that was July 9,
I
right?
second. All in favor?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Good, so those passed. We have not looked at the 19th of March,
23rd of April.
23rd of April,
23rd.
and that's just me
There's some
not
others we
finding.
And I have a whole list
Okay.
that'll be coming out in the next couple of days.
Yes.
Major week. Town administrator update.
I just have a couple things. I'm going to keep it very brief.
Thank you.
With how late we are. Just to let you know, we've hired a new assistant town administrator. He starts on August 18th. His name is Nicholas Milano. He was actually formerly worked at the MSBA, which will be very helpful to us in our process, and was the chief of staff to Mayor Vigian in Marlborough for the last 4 years.
Okay.
A few town hall housekeeping items. We are replacing the light outside for the flagpole. Eric has kind of had a temporary light there for the last 6-8 months because we had some water damage. That should be replaced shortly, and it will be a little brighter than it is now.
Great.
You also see the Medfield Townhouse signs have been missing. They're being worked on and or replaced because they had rotted after 20 years. And just so you know, the chapel legislation was signed by the governor a few days ago, and you are set to enter into a long-term lease for an arts and cultural center.
Great.
Subject to compliance with limited.
Yeah, subject to the Inspector General's comments. I do have one minor thing. I had a citizen request that we install picnic tables at the gazebo across the street. If it's too late in the season now, they would recommend it for next season so that people can eat outside during lunchtime. I will check with the library to see if it conflicts with any of their concerts.
It may conflict with Memo's concert.
That was my feeling, but we can talk about whether or not a few of them out there is helpful.
Yeah.
I mean, there should be a number of Eagle Scout projects next year that could involve the construction of picnic tables.
Right.
At least one of them.
Movable picnic
For
tables.
the next
that we
year's
can move
Eagle
out.
Scout project season.
Yeah.
Right.
That's it. And we're reviewing the cherry sheet estimates that were just released. The governor is set to sign the budget tomorrow at 10 a.m. Once he does that, we'll have a better idea of what we have. And that's all I have for tonight.
Okay. I don't think we have anything new on the Selectmen's action list.
We do not.
Okay. Selectmen's report.
Very quickly, we had another collective bargaining section with the Medfield Police League this morning. Chief Corrett, Christine, and I, and we've scheduled another one for the last week in August. I think ideally, if we're able to reach an agreement, we'd come back here to the Board of Selectmen, and then with the hope that any town meeting action that would be required around that contract would be done at the special town meeting for the hospital in the fall to get that cleared ahead of that. So no deal or anything to report, but we had another meeting and we'll be meeting again. As you may recall, the former president of the Medfield Police League has left Medfield and gone to be a police officer elsewhere. They did elect a new president, and so we're kind of back at the bargaining table. That's it.
The Townwide Master Planning Committee has been busily meeting. We selected the consultant, and then we, since our last selectmen's meeting, we had a couple meetings. One, first to plan our first meeting with the consultant, and then to have that first meeting with the consultant, and so we're off and running.
Excellent. And I have two brief comments. One, there are just some offline discussions. We had a couple of tax questions that came up with different residents, and I simply want to commend Yvonne Remillard for both being technically proficient and professional and thorough in her job and uncovering a couple things, but then coming back with compassion and trying to help get to some resolutions on some tax changes that people hadn't anticipated. And Mark, I have to tip my hat to you for some of the detailed legal research you had to do on one of those cases. It's one of these cases where you have to do taxation the right way, but sometimes when people get worked up about things, it's good to be able to work with them. The other thing is, just to briefly give you a heads up, I've had another informal meeting with the neighbors of the Westwood Gun Club, and this is basically trying to keep this off of a selectman agenda, and actually I'm trying to function more as simply somebody who's trying to help that group work out resolutions. The issue, there is a valid issue, and I may wind up looking for some help from you down the road, Mark. The gun club, even though they're exempt and they've been there first, and the residents have done some research and discovered that the membership of the gun club has probably doubled in the last 5 years or so. So although they're first, the residents' concern is noise. And the activity level of the gun club from what it was like when they first moved there to what it is now is qualitatively a lot different. And so we're basically trying to figure out a path through to have an amicable, collaborative, neighborly discussion to get to a resolution of that. So that issue hasn't gone away. And I think those are the two main things that I had to talk about.
Barbara Layton. We're gonna mention Barbara.
Well, good, yeah, there was a graveside service. I always forget where I've been, that's right. I knew there was something I had done. There was a graveside service in honor of Barbara Layton, who you all know passed away in July. It was like July 11th, or I think it was the 11th of July. So made her better than 100 years old. You may recall we had a commemorative Barbara Layton Day for her here. I learned an awful lot from people that have known her. One of the fun things, even if you've been in this town for the 23 or 4 years that I've been here for, is you wind up running across stories of people that have been here for a long time that precede you but are still here, that in her case was one of these people that I went completely unaware of for the better part of the time I've been here until we had that Barbara Layton Day. But she grew up, lived in Medfield her whole life, but spent a lot of time in Maine, and apparently was a classic hard driving independent Yankee from down east. Had her own snowshoes when she was a little girl and bequeathed them to somebody here in town who just had a 3-year-old kid with a note on what to do to get them fixed. And it's the kind of character that,
There's land on Brocken Lane that she dedicated, it was family land that she dedicated to the town for open space.
Right.
Conservation land.
Right. I did have a question about, on the informational items. The one I had a question on, if anybody can give me an update, was the correspondence between Bishop Lane and the Appalachian Mountain Club. I saw the letter that came back from the Appalachian Mountain Club.
Mr. Sia sent a letter back.
Yeah, sure, there was a follow-up letter in your packet from him as well.
Are they getting reimbursed for the survey?
They still haven't reached agreement.
Yeah.
Is that, okay, that seemed to me to not be a unreasonable thing to expect, given that the residents had to go, so for what it's worth.
The Appalachian Mountain Club has not been as open to discussing this issue as we had hoped.
Wonder if they'd get more open if we said you can't have a Bay Circuit trail through Medfield if you're gonna damage people's property and not take responsibility for it.
So I've actually asked them to come into a meeting in September to discuss that very issue.
Okay. And we'll wait and see if they do. And then, I didn't print it out. I did want to acknowledge the transfer station worker. Last name, is it David Willett? I just didn't print it out. Is it David Willett?
Sean.
Sean Willett. Just want to publicly acknowledge, he got a thank you note that came into the selectmen for the great service that he provided at the transfer station for somebody who needed help. And it's good to know that we have town employees that make up for all the mischief that the Board of Selectmen does to people that, to foster good relations with the town. So just a tip of the hat to our transfer station workers. And I'm at the bottom of my list. Next meeting, August 13th, Tuesday. I will miss it again.
We will have a very light agenda on the 13th. Hopefully some minutes and a few other things to.
Christine will save it all up until our second meeting in August on Thursday, August 29th.
Rare
and I will be
Thursday
here.
meeting.
Rare Thursday meeting. I'm tied up.
School will be in session.
Mm-hmm.
Traffic will be back in the center of Medfield.
Can't be worse than tonight. So. And with that.
And then our meeting on Tuesday, September 3rd is just a working session with McCabe on the Medfield State Hospital zoning. There'll be no other agenda items that evening.
Okay.
Party's over. Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All
You
those
have a
in
lot-
favor?
You have a lot to sign.
Aye.
And, yeah. Well, we beat 11 o'clock for the official meeting.
You're watching Medfield TV Community Shows.